Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to episode 32 of Merchants of Novigrad, a podcast about everything Gwent. My name is Weisberg, and today I'm being joined by the newest acquisition to our little team, the babbling Belgian Trovinat. And as you guys can see, once again, we have a very unique guest, a true lore master and the host of the On the Path podcast, TheFoxBride. How are you guys doing?
Great, we're doing great, I think.
No, yeah. Thanks for having me on.
Before we get into it, as always, a few words to everyone watching live. Guys, you can ask questions in chat, and we'll try to answer as many of them as possible, or at least the interesting ones. If you'd like to stay in touch off stream, you can follow us on Twitter at Novigrad Podcast. And as usual, this episode is going to be uploaded on YouTube, Spotify, and numerous other platforms either tonight or tomorrow. So if you can't watch live, you have your chance later in the week. With that being said, Brett, Trovy, what have you been up to? How are you doing, guys?
I'm doing fine. It's been incredibly busy personally, but I'm super excited to do my first hosting here on the the Merchants of Novigrad podcast. So very excited to be here.
Yeah, no, this will be a lot of fun. Looking through the questions on here, get pretty deep in there. So this will be interesting because I know you were being very, very generous by saying lore master and all that. Like I'm 100% positive that you know more than me. I just know certain things. I know we talked about this before. A big thing I love about the books are the themes behind it, as opposed to actual like facts and stuff like that. So, this tying in with Gwent and being the inaugural one with Trovy here. I think we're tight enough now. I can call you Trovy now.
Yeah, I think
So,
that's fine.
yeah, this will be good. And a happy Father's Day to everybody out there, and to a lot of Americans out there. Happy Juneteenth as well.
Is that a special day? It's like a holiday in the US?
Yeah, Juneteenth is basically when, during the American Civil War, the government went down to my home state of Texas and said, hey, all the slaves are freed. And they made it a federal holiday last year. So, it's kind of one of those long time things. So I think it's pretty much now the inaugural thing, or not inaugural, the annual thing now, if you want to say that, kind of symbolic, I guess, if you will, kind of ending, quote, ending slavery kind of during the American Civil War. It just happened to fall on Father's Day this year.
All right. Actually, there is a movement here in the Netherlands to introduce a very similar holiday, and that will be July the 1st. I don't remember the exact year, but it was July the 1st, 18 something something, when the Kingdom of the Netherlands abolished slavery in all its colonies. Except it hasn't really caught on yet, so I guess we'll have to wait a couple more years until there's enough of backing for the government to do something.
Yeah, I think it's a lot more, obviously the history of America is greatly tied to institutional slavery. So, it's kind of a bigger thing over here for sure.
But I would say we are going in the right direction because as recent as this year, our government actually apologized for all the war crimes committed in Indonesia during their war of independence. So things are changing.
Yeah, the same thing happened in Belgium a few weeks ago with the king publicly apologizing for the war crimes in Congo. So it's
I taught world geography. Yeah, I've taught world geography before, and I'm actually moving into world history again. But a big thing I did when we covered Africa was Leopold in the Congo and talking with all them and showing them like the hands cut off and all the rubber stuff. Because, again, they'd never heard of that. I'm not even sure I even learned about that when I was in high school some 20 years ago. And then, like World War II, the Dutch East Indies, all that stuff in there. And then, Japan went in there and it almost became worse. And it's like, damn, they got really hit hard at that time.
Oh, yeah.
The old Dutch East Indies there.
But moving from that topic into Gwent territory, Brett, together with Lucy, you've been running a podcast called On the Path. What can you tell us about the show and about what you've been doing with the show in the recent months?
So basically, this is kind of covers everything Witcher related. We're primarily covering right now the main story of The Witcher 3, like the main quests. And the episode that comes out today, be later today, kind of overnight for Euros, kind of afternoon for Americans, is going to be the last of Novigrad. It's where he freed Dandelion, Poet Under Pressure. And outside of that, we covered season 2. And a fun thing we've been able to do, and this is largely Lucy's doing, is she's really good at reaching out to people like this. We interviewed a couple of people from the show, Misha Simpson, who plays Francesca, and Paul Bullion, who plays Lambert. And Lucy actually got to meet him when she was down in London, so he is now a close friend of the show. And if you watched WitcherCon last year, the host, Julia Hardy, we interviewed her as well. And all of them were amazing. And, we'll see other guests kind of coming up. Every time that comes up, people ask, like the top ones in there, they're like Henry Cavill, Anya Shalatra, Freya Allen, and Lauren Hestrick, the showrunner. And I'm like, those are like the big four Henry Cavill's in a universe all to himself. And it's like, we're never going to interview him. We're not even going to try to do that because that's just way beyond. Unless we start a Warhammer podcast. I think he'd be interested in coming on a Warhammer podcast. But, even the other ones, I think Lauren Histrick, the showrunner, would be the one I would really want to interview to kind of dive into how that thing gets adapted and made. But otherwise, kind of do anything, everything. And we just joined 983 Media. So from now on, the podcast will be available in video form so people can watch it on YouTube. It'll still be available on all the podcasting platforms. And it's been fun joining her, having her join up, if you will. So it's been a blast, and I can't wait to see what we do from now on.
You said that you would have to do a Warhammer podcast to get Henry Cavill on the show, but you have to remember it has to be Warhammer 40k, right? Because if you do Warhammer Fantasy Battle, I don't think he's interested.
Okay, I know nothing about Warhammer at all, so I will defer to your expertise on that.
Oh, really? Warhammer was actually my gateway franchise into the fantasy world. So I used to play Warhammer Fantasy Battle. I've never gotten into 40k. There's also the Warhammer RPG, and there was even a TCG called Warcry, and that was my first ever card game, and I honestly sucked at it. I was really bad.
Yeah, no, every time I hear that or see him going to a store, I'm like, yeah, I know nothing about that game. I know it's a computer game also. I've seen that kind of pop up every now and then. But yeah, I know jack about it.
Yeah, I think my experience level is just as high as yours, Brett, on that account. I see a lot of the games passing by. I think at this point they cover almost every genre with Warhammer games. But it's very limited on my side as well. But you already mentioned the amazing guests you had on the podcast a few over the course of the past months. Did you and Lucy expect this much success, or how did that start out?
I mean, I initially did the podcast. It was called Whispers of Oxenfurt, and it was solely about the books. And I started that, I think that might have been in 2018. And so I've been doing it for a while. And, you can walk a fine line between confidence and arrogance. But I think I'm really good at it, at podcasting, at talking, interviewing, all of that stuff. And so what initially happened was I got done with the books and I decided I want to transition to something else, and I wanted a co-host. And somehow we came into contact. We both still can't remember exactly what it was, but I remember Nightmare of the Wolf came out, and I was like, okay, I want to get someone on for Nightmare of the Wolf and to kind of guest and see. And this is back when it was just whispers. And I don't even think I've ever really told her this. But pretty much what it was is I was thinking, okay, this can kind of be like a tryout, if you will, with her, and to see, do we have any kind of chemistry? And how's it going to do? And she came on and she was great. And I'm like, okay, that's the first podcast she's ever done. And I'm like, okay, that's it. And I asked her, I'm like, hey, I'm going to transition to something else. Do you want to join? She was all game for it. And, she's been great. She's gotten so much better at it, because that was her first off. You listen to those first episodes, that's the first time she's ever podcasted. And even now I can tell with each episode how much more comfortable she is, how much better she is. And so I'm not surprised at, what we've done because we're both really great at it, and we both love it. It's very easy to talk about something like The Witcher 3, which I know has been like circle jerked to death. But there's a reason why. People
Hmm.
say that it's one of the best games of all time and people care about it and talk about it so much is it's so deep, and really diving back through it. There were so many references to the books, like little things. Like I think it might have been the last episode that was released when they're doing the play in Novigrad. They bring up Lorenzo Moya, and like I mentioned in there, I was just like, I've heard that name before. And it was mentioned. He was at Brenna. He was a condottieri. And it's just they throw that in there, and it's one of those things that if you don't know about it, it doesn't matter. It's just another name. But if you have read the books and something like me, it's just, oh, it's another kind of like nudge to these dorks like me that have poured over the books. And it's just stuff like that that makes that game so great and easy to talk about.
Yeah. It's also really fun because if you go back and forth between the books and the games, I feel like every time you do that, you find something new, another detail that you didn't notice before that was either mentioned in the books or vice versa. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'm
Um,
sure I haven't played through Blood and Wine since I've actually read the books. And that's something to really go back through and to
yeah,
see, especially all those interactions with Regis, to really see like how much is in there. So that's one thing I'm really excited to replay.
yeah, definitely, because there's a lot of history there I mean, Blood and Wine is almost completely a fan project based on the books, especially the relationship with Regis. It's one of the best DLCs I think that's out there.
Well,
But as you said, yeah, go
did y'all
ahead.
play Farewell of the White Wolf, the Witcher
Um,
2 mod?
yeah, I've seen it, but I haven't played it yet. No.
Okay, I replayed through that. Was it earlier this year or late last year? So Farewell to White Wolf is a complete like fan-made mod of The Witcher 2 that tells basically something ends, something begins. Geralt and Yen's wedding. And it's everybody goes back. Like everybody is there that you can imagine coming back. Um, what's her? I just completely drew a blank as to who it was. It wasn't Adam Pangrant. It was shit. All right. Well, disregard that. Okay, cut that, cut that, cut that. They bring a bunch of people back, and like Regis comes back, and they have options where you can talk about Angoulême, and you can talk about Kyrie, like you talk about the Stiga Castle, and then there's actually one. And if you haven't played it by now, whatever. If people want to, it'll be fine. But there's actually one sequence where Geralt has like a nightmare or a dream, and you have to fight people, and Vilgefortz is one of the people you fight. And I'm just like, holy shit. Something like that is just awesome that they put this in. That is
Mhm.
a complete love letter to it. And when we also had guests like Berja, Pavel Berja, the comms lead for CDPR, especially like Gwent. And he was on and actually said, like how great that was and how they kind of worked with them and allowed them to do all that. And just something like that, you have to play that. If you have The Witcher 2, it's a free mod. Farewell to White Wolf. You have to play that if you've read the books.
There's
Definitely will
actually,
after that explanation.
yeah, there's actually two comments I have on this. The first comment is probably the greatest thing about rereading the novels or reading them for the first time after playing the games is you can actually hear the voices. Right? Because when you read them without playing the games, you do imagine how Geralt or Yennefer or other characters are going to sound like. But after playing the games, that voice is already in your head. And that just adds so much more to the reading experience, in my opinion. And two,
That's
when it,
almost, I was going to say that in a way, like you're absolutely right about that. I can't reread Dijkstra and not hear the Witcher 3 voice. Regis is a big one. And in a weird way, that has something that has almost spoiled me on the show was because the first visual adaptation, if you will, of The Witcher came from The Witcher 3. And so you see these people there, and that's kind of what we have in our head, and the voices in our head. And so when it's done differently for the Netflix series, it's like you can't live up to it. Like Dijkstra's fine in the show, but it's just, man, he can't be better than Dijkstra in The Witcher 3. Like that Dijkstra was so funny. First off, just absolutely hysterical lines. His sarcasm and just sardonic nature is just absolutely outrageous. And it just kind of ruined me so much on that. It was too good, I guess I should say.
I loved your swooning posts on Dijkstra the past few weeks.
I
On Twitter.
Yeah, and that's kind of the thing too. He's my favorite character in The Witcher 3. And I used to say he was like one of my favorite characters from the books, but I think going back to the books, I think I just like the Witcher 3 character too much. And I'm putting that character into the book character. And he's not quite that much that I can remember. He's obviously sarcastic, but he's played up to an 11 in The Witcher 3, and it just works so well for me. And I could talk about that. I could talk about that dude all day.
I think we are going to get there at some point during the show. You know, the consistency between how characters behave like in the books and then in the games, because there is not that much of it. I can only think of a handful of characters that are exactly the same way, you know, in the books and in the games. But as I said, I had 2 comments. I made one, so I'm gonna follow up on the other one. Speaking of mods, I remember, and that was before The Witcher 3. There was an amazing mod that was work in progress for The Witcher 2. I played through it a couple of times, and the guy had so many ideas on how to expand it. Because if you guys don't know, the Red engine that they used for The Witcher 2, they actually created a software that allowed players to create their own stories and locations and stuff like that. So that guy was extremely ambitious, and the mod was great, even though it was only work in progress. And at some point he said, guys, I'm no longer gonna work on the mod because it was so good, CDPR actually hired me.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. You know, I just heard about that with Fallout 4 has this massive mod, London, and like the lead quest designer on that got hired by Bethesda. And they're still doing the mod, but it's like that's got to be a hell of a compliment for what you're doing that it's so good the parent company hires you away. Like that's incredible.
Absolutely, I think that's the dream for a lot of fans creating content out there, to work for the company who brought those games to life. But to follow on the question asked by Trovinat and the success of your show, you already said that, you know, Henry Cavill is just in a different league, and inviting him to the show will be very complicated. But what about Doug Cockle, the voice behind Geralt in the Witcher games? Have you tried to contact him? Because for a very long time you couldn't really approach him, but recently he's made his appearance on the You Think You Know the Witcher show. So I think he'll be more inclined to participate in various fan shows at the moment.
Yeah, and me and Lucy both appeared on that. Think You Know The Witcher. We were 2 of the guests on the very first episode. So we have that connection. We have contacted him, and I don't think we heard back, but I think we're going to try to contact back again. But yeah, we'll make sure to put in that, hey, we're fellow Think You Know The Witcher fans here, but I won't tell him that I went further than him. He might not be too privy to that.
I don't think he'll be upset. But moving on and entering the proper Gwent territory, because so far we've been mostly talking about The Witcher itself. We've had a little bit of trouble coming up with a proper question list because there's so much ground to cover. So a lot of these questions are going to be very broad in nature. So let's start with this. There's multiple sources of lore in Gwent. We have the artwork, there is the voice lines, even the flavor text in some cases. But you also have the reward trees. Before we discuss all of these sources individually, how much attention do you pay to lore when playing Gwent?
When it comes to lore trees like that, I actually try not to because I'm so messed up now with Witcher lore and timelines because you've got the books, you've got the games, which the games in Gwent are the same. It's CDPR's lore. And then you have the show. And there are cases where all 3 can be different. And I lose track of who is what because it's in the books, Geralt is older than Yen, right? And then in the show, Yen is older than Geralt. I think that's what it is, right? Or do I have that reversed? I don't even know anymore.
I think in the books and in the games they are about the same age.
Okay, but I think like one is like older, like whether it be a couple of years or whatever. I think somehow it got in my head that like somehow Netflix like reversed it. And I lose track of stuff like that. And there was actually something I cut from the previous episode of the podcast because it had to do with series age. And I looked it up, and it's like series age, I guess, is different by translation in the book. Certain translations, she's older, certain translations, she's younger. And then CDPR has her born 1251. And since the game is 1272, she's 21. But it's just, wait, I'm pretty sure I thought Siri was always like a 19 or something like that in the books. And so all of this stuff has just boggled my mind. I don't need to put another one in there to just make it this mishmash of lore.
I think she was always a teenager in the books. I don't think her age was mentioned specifically. I'm actually going through the Tower of Swallows for the third or fourth time at the moment, and I'm, in the early stages of the book, so where she spends her time with Visigoda, and I think the only remark he made was that she's a teenager. But not an adult. But she's not an adult.
Yeah, you would just have to do it with like Pavetta's betrothal, like whenever that year would be, and you kind of have to like background it to then, and then like the fall of Sintra, and yeah, there's something because that's the main thing that I find frustrating, being what I do, but I also find it hysterical, is that Andrei Sapkowski just does not give a shit about this stuff. He does not care. He's the anti-George R.R. Martin, who has everything like a history book. Sapkowski does not care. Like, he just does not care about all this stuff that we try to piece together. And I just imagine he's laughing his ass off at us discussing this.
Yeah, especially with those small chapters in between certain stories that just time jump to 80 years further to show that certain characters died of certain diseases, and then you go, wait, but
yeah, that Lady of the Lake is just constant time travel and just jumping around. And I know with the Netflix first season, people were upset about the time jumps, and I'm like, that's the biggest homage to Andrei Sapkowski right there. That's the most, what do you call it, accurate things to the books, is a confusing ass timeline. So if you don't like that, wait till you actually read the books.
Yeah.
I think he was once asked about the map, if he has a map of his universe.
Yeah.
And what he gave the journalist was like a very short answer. That basically was like, yeah, I have a drawing somewhere of something that I sometimes need, and that's it.
Yeah, wasn't there, I swear there was somewhere, there was something I think he said, was it a Polish translation of the book? I thought I read somewhere, which that sums up my, just again, constant knowledge of the Witchers. I think I read somewhere, I think I heard somewhere, that there was some place where he actually said, like, that's it. And I want to say the show map that I think he said was like, yeah, that's it. But he might have just done that so people stop asking him about it.
Or just to throw another wrench in the works to make it even more confusing.
Well, and that's the thing too, that, when you talk, because everyone's like, what is the canon? And I'm like, the canon are the books, and the canon is whatever Andrei Sapkowski says. If Andrei Sapkowski says that it's this, it's canon. Doesn't matter what you think or what you want. He's in charge of it. Because he's not directly involved in CDPR, CDPR is amazing fan fiction. It's incredible fan fiction. And he's kind of tied into it, but Andrei Sapkowski, the creator, is the person behind it. He gets to say what it is. And it's not CDPR. It's very, 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 very good fan fiction. Because he is tied into the show and actually involved in it. That is more canon, if you will, than the games. People don't want to hear that because they don't like a lot of stuff in the show. But if he says something in there, it's like, okay, then it's canon. It's his baby. He can do what he wants with it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And people need to understand he's not Tolkien. Because if you read the Lord of the Rings, right? There is the appendices, and there is Silmarillion, which actually explains the history of the universe in detail. And people think, it's one of the most boring books or fantasy books ever because it's basically a history book combined with the Bible. People
It's like
don't
an
like the Silmarillion.
appendices too, right? Isn't it like it's like a history book, except it's also like an appendices, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's like like Game of Thrones, Song of Ice and Fire, like Fire and Blood. That's what it was, right? Yeah, the history of the Targaryens. That's like the history book that he finally got to write. Like that's ultimately what George wanted to do. He didn't want to do another narrative book. He wanted to do a like history book, and he got to do it. And it's like, yeah, it's just Sapkowski does not care.
Nope.
Does not care about that stuff at all. Like that dude wants to cash a check. That's it. Good for him too. He created something really good. Get that bag.
But moving on, as I said, there is multiple sources of lore, and I would like to start with visual clues. So with the artwork itself, like obviously there is Geralt of Rivia, and you can see him in about 10 cards, I guess, maybe more. I've never counted. You also have Emir. I think Emir is the second or even the most depicted character in Gwent.
And all iterations of him, probably, yeah.
But my question is, do you think these clues can tell a story on their own? And have you found more of them? Because I only know about Geralt and Emir and about their stories being depicted in the artwork.
Yeah, there was, man, I was streaming Gwent last night, and there was one that I came across, and I was like, man, I need to remember that. But that's what happens when you drink and stream. Everything just goes right out. I don't remember what it was. But I know there was one that I hadn't seen that I know I saw Lionheart bring up that on the tribute, on the two things for tribute and like non-tribute that you pay with Syndicate, I guess there was Ciri's portrait was on one of them in the background of the tribute one. And I was like, oh, I was like, he'd never seen that. I'd never seen that. You know, there's fun stuff in there. When it comes to stories, though, I'm not sure. Maybe somebody much more with a keen eye, I guess, and diving into it can do that. But it's those Easter eggs, like you mentioned there, that I think are just like kind of cool to shout out. Like Lydia's card, Lydia van Berettevort, like she's painting, and you know she's got the thing that's kind of covering a little bit of her face, and I'm like, okay, that's one of those that if you know behind it, then it's a very cool little shout out. And same thing with Lydia, that tons of people still didn't know. That I was kind of shocked at this. Was that's Lydia on Imperial Diviner. Like she's the one looking into this ball, trying to find Ciri. Ciri's in this glass ball, and you can see behind the glass ball is a skull. And it's like, that's Lydia. She doesn't have the bottom of her face. And so many people still like did not know that because it didn't say, you know, Lydia, just said Imperial Diviner. And I'm like, no, that's got to be Lydia. She's missing her jaw.
I've
Yeah, I
never
always
really thought about it that way.
Yeah. I
You
always
haven't?
assumed it was just an effect because you looked it through the crystal ball. And she also has
Ah.
the very weird two-pronged headdress from
Yeah.
what's her
The
name?
Sheila?
Yeah, Sheila
Yeah, that
indeed.
Sheila has. Yeah. And that I guess that would be it. But to me, if you're showing a diviner, if you're showing a mage that's missing the bottom part of her jaw, to me, like that's Lydia.
I mean, she
Like,
even I think Lydia's animated card actually has her
yeah.
illusion fade away at certain
Yeah,
points.
the string, like not the string, the grass or plant, the plant leaf or whatever kind of like covers it for a little bit. Yeah.
And I think there's even a painting in the back that switches from her face to a skull at the same time. So that's even an extra detail in the background there.
Yeah. And that was one too from, I think it was, see, now I'm just, these things come to me. I don't remember. I think it was actually in the show when Lydia and Rince are talking. I think there is a like painting. It might even be a painting of Ciri. I don't know, but there's like
Mhm.
paintings back there. It's just like, oh, Lydia likes to paint. Like there, you got that in there. Something in there that if you're paying attention, it's cool. Otherwise, it means absolutely nothing. It's just
That's
fun.
aside from the more obvious foreshadowing in that scene that also refers to her gorgeous face.
Yeah, that's about to get to. It's about to be gone.
Yeah. I think one of my favorite cards on that front is Johnny's. Because in the game he mentions, oh, it's the line. It's an amazing line about shitting against the sunrise or something like that. And then the card is literally him taking a dump, and you can see Siri running in the background
Oh yeah,
from
in the
the
premium version.
yeah from the
Yeah,
witches.
Johnny's. Yeah, that's a good one to just if you leave it up there, you see it and you're like, oh, directly from the game. I will admit, it took me forever to realize he was taking a shit. Like to actually look at because I never looked at what he was doing. I thought he was just kind of squatting, chilling, and then you see Siri in the background, and then just looking, it's just like, oh yeah, his trousers are down. He's
Yeah,
taking a shit.
there's something dropping there. Yeah.
Oh Johnny.
Yeah, this is why I specifically mentioned Emir, because not a lot of people actually can see Emir in the Imperial Brigade card. But he's there behind the soldiers. And what I wanted to tell about, the story linked to artwork, you can see a lot of stories through artwork that depicts Emir. Like you see, what was his name? Peter Evertson being escorted out of the royal chamber or the imperial chamber in Emir's card. You can you can see Emir in Kalak's card or in Albric's card, Impera Brigade, and a couple of other cards. And all these cards tell a part of the story from the books.
Yeah, like there's ones like Jutta, whatever it is, like falling down. It's like Geralt standing over.
Oh yeah.
So Geralt's over her there. So yeah, stuff like that. They put in a ton of ones in there, and yeah, there's just so many. Like if you were to actually go and piecemeal by each one, like you could just do a billion of them.
Yeah.
And Master Mirror is another one that when the Master Mirror expansion came out, he's in the usurper, like the background of the usurper card. He's in, was it Varak? I think like all of the changing cards that
Oh
came
yeah,
out.
the
Isn't he
evolving
like
cards.
involved in
Yes.
those evolving cards? Yeah, I think he's like involved in like everyone there. And it's fun that they do that and they don't announce it, they just put it out there and eventually someone's going to figure it out. And that's kind of cool thing for people to stumble across.
Yeah. But what I really like about the Emir cards as well is it really connects with the books in the sense of in the books you barely see Emir. He's not seen a lot of action in the books, but people constantly talk about him. Emperor this, Emir that, almost every chapter. People are obsessed with what the Emperor is going to do. And you can see that in Gwent. He has a single card of his own, but he's depicted in so many other cards that it really connects with how he was treated in the books. There was very few dialogue lines attributed to Emir, but people talk about him constantly.
I think a big reason for that also is you have to keep Emir in the reader's mind because of the massive reveal at the end.
Oh yeah.
Like he has to be in there at least somewhat in every book, or you're gonna forget about him. And then if he comes back, if he's not in the last three books, then he comes back and is like, "Oh yeah, it's my daughter." This whole thing, yes, here's my daughter. I'm Dunny. It would be like, wait, who's? Oh yeah. But you're right. If you keep him kind of fresh in the mind to do it, and it gives you kind of the reasoning, why Nilfgaard was invading and to kind of get with the villain, if you will. Those were always interesting chapters in the books because, yeah, it revolved around like Vatier, the intelligence, and then like Menno, Coorn, all these military leaders. And it was very grounded in Geralt's story, trying to find his daughter with the Hansa. And then, yeah, you're jumping to the literal Nilfgaardian emperor, the guy who's making everything. The reason why everything's happening is because of this guy and his invasion. And to keep it in his mind, I guess would be good to kind of see like, oh, what is he doing there? Like why would he be doing what he's doing?
Yeah, that's a very good point.
All right, yeah, there's so many details. I mean, it's something that I also often do, just go through the full screen artwork of all the cards in Gwent, because there's so many details just to discover, and it's a fun activity on its own. But since the cards depict so many events from either the books or the games, do you think you could explain the story of Geralt to somebody by using the cards as a visual support, or is there still too much missing there?
Yeah, there's probably too much to do it justice. I think there's too much missing, mainly because, and I've been on record for this like crazy, the saga and the novels of The Witcher is not about Geralt. It is not Geralt's story. It is Ciri's story. And the people that want it to concentrate on Geralt is the same thing kind of with The Witcher 3. And that's why The Witcher 3 is such a great love letter to the books. Is look at The Witcher 3. Whose story is that? Is that Geralt's story? No, it's Ciri's. It's all about Ciri. We're trying to find Ciri. We go back through Ciri's eyes, and then once we find her, like the whole goal is to find her. Then once we find Ciri, Geralt's done. It's all about what Ciri needs to do. You can get the good and bad endings based on how you understand the story. Did you understand that Ciri needs to be an adult? You need to treat her like an adult. Oh, you didn't understand it? Congrats, she's fucking dead.
Yeah.
Because you treated her in the wrong way the whole way. And we just found out in the last thing to put under pressure when we find Dandelion or Yaskier, he basically is not that worried about Ciri. And Geralt's like, "What is this? Like you're worried about writing songs anymore? Aren't you worried about Ciri?" He's like, "Why would I be worried about her? Have you seen her fight? She's not that little girl at Kaer Morhen anymore." And like that's a big thing to beat the player over the head. Stop treating her like a kid. Treat her like an adult. And that's a big thing there with Geralt is it's Ciri's story, the novels, all of that. Lady of the Lake, the final novel. It's all about that. It's all about Ciri. Like that's what it is. It's her thing, and then it becomes. And so, like, if I were to call it main characters, it's like 1A and 1B. Like Geralt would be 1A, Ciri would be 1B, Yen would be 2, and then everyone else is 3 on down. Who gives a shit after that? They're all secondary from that point, beyond. Don't tell CDPR that. Like they think Triss is up there, like 2A and 2B with Yen. But sorry again to break it to a lot of y'all, Triss is pretty fucking insignificant in the books. Like people got horny for her in the games, which is good. That's fine. I'll let people do whatever they want in that sense. But when it comes to back to you talking about their Geralt story, I don't know if you could do it in Gwent. Honestly, it just wouldn't be that interesting to me. Like Geralt's interesting when he's interacting with other people, when he's interacting with the Hansa and all them. He's a far more interesting character in the books than he is in the show. I keep hoping beyond hope that they really characterize him a little bit more in the show. They make him more humorous like he is in the books. He has a lot of humor, decent amount of sarcasm. Like he gives people a lot of shit. People give him a lot of shit. And that's what I really enjoy about Geralt from the book.
Mm-hmm. The fact that he gets criticized so much by the other characters is what builds
They
him up.
kick his balls all the time. It's awesome. It's my favorite part is like whiny, mopey, bitchy Geralt just getting beaten down by people.
And then everybody else making soup in the background,
Yeah,
not caring about him. And
Regis's
sitting on his-
Mandrake. Pass more of the Mandrake ale or whatever it was.
Yeah. Stop moping here, Mandrake.
He's a mopey bitch in the book so often. It's great.
But that would make him a great character for a game series, of course, if he would be that constantly. But it's a big difference between the
Yeah,
the
and
games
it's a
and the
video
books.
game. Like you got to have so many more. Like The Witcher 3 is littered with monsters. I think after Blood of Elves, how many monsters does Geralt actually fight? Like,
Maybe
because it's
3.
not really a. Yeah, it's like, is it really only 3?
No, I don't think. I'm not sure. I think he was set to fight some monsters into some, and that's about it.
Okay. He stumbled upon. Remember, he was in that cave when he was overhearing like Stefan and them, and he fought
Yeah.
like those really. That was a weird ass like scene. That was a wild
It's
scene.
it's really weirdly described as well. It's like, was it like described as an almost talking rat? No, I'm confusing with
It was a
the
very humanoid. It was very humanoid monsters that were like, "We're gonna kill you. You're a Witcher." He's like, "I'm not a Witcher anymore. I swore
yeah.
off being a Witcher. I don't even have my. I don't think he
Right.
had his medallion at that time. He's like, I'm done being a Witcher." And I
Is that
thought, man, I love that chapter so much because I'm like, holy shit, they're just gonna let him go. Like Geralt is not a Witcher anymore. Like he's just not. He doesn't care about that bullshit. He just wants to find Ciri. And then he ends up having to like fucking kill them. I was so disappointed in that.
Is that the scene where they describe it as that he breaks his sword, but it's an illusion that he breaks the sword?
Yeah, I think that was it.
That's the
Maybe
same
at that
scene,
point,
right?
maybe he had. Is that when he had Fringilla's
Yeah,
medallion, and he was
yeah,
able to do
it's
the
that.
illusion that he would do during Vilgefortz, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I think that must have been
That's
it.
the same scene, and it's
Okay,
a creature that's very weirdly described, but it is
yeah,
talking.
that
It,
was a weird scene.
there's a
That's
few of
really weird.
those. There's a
Oh my
few
god!
of those, but
Lady of the Lake is my favorite book, and it has my favorite chapters in like all of like books, all of novels. But it has some that I can't fucking stand. Like Lady of the Lake is just up and down, but it's my favorite by a mile.
Mhm. And it also supports your assessment that Ciri is the main character. That's the entire book that
Yeah.
she basically tells
The
that night.
culmination and the climax is about her, and you're right. She's telling the story. Is everything that happened in there what happened? I don't know. It's Ciri's story. She
It's her
gets to tell
story.
it. Yep.
Yeah.
Did she go to Camelot? Was she speaking with Galahad? Did Yen and Geralt die? Who knows? Ciri
That's
does.
that's another good indication that Sapkowski doesn't really care about anything,
No.
the way
Oh
that book
no.
starts.
The way the book starts, the way the book ends also.
Yeah,
The way it ends is
likewise.
just like, wait, did this happen? Sure. But no, but it said this. Yeah, it did. Oh, but you also said this. Yeah, Siri told it. She's an unreliable narrator. Let me go
Yeah,
cash another check.
indeed. And then we also have the voice lines in Gwent. There's a lot of details there as well, but I think I'm gonna ask the question anyway, but do you think they complement the artwork lore-wise as well, or is that also something that is just an overload lore-wise?
No, I look, the only reason I love everything about Gwent, and I realized this again playing it last night and streaming it. I love everything about Gwent except actually playing the game, except the actual gameplay. The artwork is incredible. The voice lines, I love them. I love that there's some are plucked straight from the games. So when you replay the games, you hear that and you just get this almost like PTSD from a card that was abused like 3 years ago that's still stuck in like, even like a beta Gwent kind of thing. But some of them just go for it. The Nilfgaardian like soldier ones are just great when they're just yelling in Nilfgaardian. I love the voice lines. The voice lines are great. The artwork is as good as it gets, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So no, it beyond does it justice.
Oh yeah, when you said about the PTSD and abused cards, it instantly reminded me of The Witcher 2 and the prologue, because I decided to replay all the Witcher games when Gwen was still in beta, and the prologue of The Witcher 2 was just full of all these voice lines. You had Foltest, and you had
Yes.
all these soldiers, and the Dan. The Reavers. What were they called?
Banner.
Not Dan
Dumb.
Banner. The Reavers. The Crinrid Reavers.
Oh yeah.
Crinrid Reavers. And all these voice lines like, are you one of us or not? Oh man, the
That's right.
prologue is so short, but it's so full. It's so packed with voice lines, and it's great
Yeah.
hearing them after. It almost gives you that Leonardo DiCaprio meme vibes. When he's pointing the finger at the TV. Yeah, that's how it feels. That's what it feels like.
Yeah, they never brought the Reavers back to Gwent. It's not a card anymore.
No.
It'll stay in beta with the reveal guy. The Nilfgaardian
Henry Varatra.
Varartra, yes. He never came back. The Varartra.
I think
R.I.P.
they will come back at some point.
I mean,
Yeah,
like the artwork's already there. It seems like that would be easy. Why would they not just use the artwork they already have?
they've been doing that lately, just bringing back old, like the leader art and the certain other cards that are just coming back. And it just makes sense. They have it, as you say.
And not only, I'm not sure if people in chat or you guys remember when Homecoming launched, all the Redanian cards were removed from the game.
Yeah.
And people were wondering why, and the rumor was they want to introduce Redania as the new faction, and later Jason Slama confirmed, yes, that was the plan, but they eventually switched to Syndicate, so that gave them the opportunity to re-release all the Redanian cards, which they did in
but
Iron Judgment.
Redanian Knight Elect still has not come back, has it?
Nope.
Damn, I remember that card. armor. Beta Gwent armor was fun.
Oh yeah, but I think Henry might make a comeback because if I'm not mistaken, you guys follow the fan art contest? I think Rosa Faratra won that contest.
Yeah.
The art
Oh,
of
really?
her.
He did. Yeah.
So I guess her and Edna and Henry being added to the game at the same time would make sense. So we could expect that at some point in the future. Because, for example, the artwork of Lydia was also part of the of the first edition of the contest, and eventually it made it to the game.
I think
Maybe some
Lady
kind of
Blake as
Nilfgaardian
well, right?
aristocrat thing or something.
Yeah.
Or I guess because they could actually fit them. Oh, they're not going to do. They said they're not going to do any more multi-faction ones, are they?
No.
Okay, because that would have been a perfect one for Syndicate Nilfgaard, because obviously they're in Novigrad.
They're not gonna do that for balance reasons, and it makes sense. What they could do, for example, is introduce cards that are spawning a card from another faction, because we already have cards like that. For example, the Runestones or Imperial Diplomacy.
Yeah.
So that is one way of going about it. But moving on, because we did talk about voice lines a little bit. And that's something that I discovered very recently. Did you know that in the Gwent files, voice lines, at least some of them, are categorized chronologically? For instance, if you listen to Ildiko's voice lines in the proper chronological order, they will tell you the story of her, Belhun, and Viraxas. Did you know that some cards have their voice lines segregated chronologically so that you can listen to the whole story voice line by voice line?
No, I guess I'm just used to liking ones like Scoia'tael, where it's just death to humans, kill the humans, humans after our lady folk.
I was just about to say,
like
they
that.
lust after our lady folk.
After our lady folk.
Oh, speaking of voice lines like that, there is a guy on Twitch with a nickname Elves Must Die, and I think right now it's like Elves Must Die 03 because the first two were banned for offensive language.
Ha! Yeah, I'd report that. Because again, as I show like all the time here. There we go. Scoia'tael.
Very nice.
I guess you commission it yourself, right? You can buy it anywhere. You have to commission it.
Yeah, there was a tournament that someone did. There was some Gwent tournament, and that was the rewards for the Gwent tournament. And I just contacted them like, "Can I buy one?" And they're like, "Yeah." So I just bought that one.
Okay.
I don't remember who it was, but I think their number. I think they might actually be like number one because I know they had to do it based on what the people chose. And it's like, yeah, if no one chooses Scoia'tael, I'll just sell that one. I was like, perfect. No one chose Scoia'tael.
So you got one for yourself.
Yeah, you have the OG one.
And a couple of years from now, nobody's gonna remember about the tournament, so you can say, "I won that one in Gwent."
If I actually, if I cared enough for stolen valor of a Gwent tournament, I might have done it. But I think I'd. Well, never. I won't say that. Never
mind. Next question, because it's something we did talk about a little bit, and that's the consistency of how the characters are portrayed in the books and the games. What do you think about characters that are presented quite differently in the books and then in the CDPR games and then Gwent? For instance, Prince Anseis. What do you think about that lack of consistency between the books and the games?
I mean, it is obviously not a big deal. Something like Anseis to me is just funny that he has like the most badass Gwent card, the most knight in shining armor, but he was just a complete utter fail son. To where Meave just mentions him one time and is like, yeah, he's a fuckhead. My other son's a fuckhead. And my husband's just the biggest one of all. Like, he was just the biggest one of all. So my whole family is just worthless. And then they put that in there for Anseis. And so, is it a big deal? No. Would I do it? Of course not. Like, if I was going to do a card like that, where it's going to be some badass, like, knight, especially, although he's Northern Realms, like, I would do that for, like, Renard de Beaufrain, someone like that. The one that Geralt loved and wanted Ciri to meet, and to say, like, no, this, Tusani Knight Errant, this was a You have like that feel for it. So something like that I think would be fine to do, but again, it's not a big deal. I'm trying to think of, I know like portrayal wise, like Brain, however you want to say it, um, isn't she's green? She's not green in her card, but she's green in the Freshenet card, which is supposed to be her, right?
Is
Didn't they?
it?
Didn't they got together, right?
I mean, Freshner was basically like a stallion for the.
I'm sorry, I have that wrong. Brain is supposed to be green. The only
Yeah.
reason that she did not inhibit from a dryad was she sweated. She sweat. So her original card, where she's like light skinned, she's supposed to be green. That's what it is, and she is
Yeah.
green in the Freshenet card. I'm pretty sure that Brain and Freshenet like got together, and like they're in that Farewell to White Wolf. I think they come back and they do
Yeah.
that. But he was a stallion, but I think for some reason that them two, or I should say a stud, if you will. But I think that, so that's one there that they did that. Again, it's not a big deal, but it is one of those like, hey, she's green in the books, but whatever.
I
Not
don't
it's
think she's
Nothing.
green in the books. I don't think
I'm
any
pretty
of the.
sure
I'm.
I'm pretty
I'm.
sure what they said was the only way that you could not tell that she was a dryad was she sweat. And
Yeah.
dryads don't sweat.
No,
Or was it
Wasn't
the
but
her
other?
it's
hair a
not
different color as
about
well?
their skin color. I don't think any of the dryads are green because Aithne actually tells Geralt that she occasionally sends dryad to human cities because humans cannot distinguish between a dryad and a human girl.
Really?
Yeah. So they're not green.
Okay.
Dryads being green is a CTPR thing.
Is it? Okay. Okay.
Um,
I'm gonna laugh if that's like a translation thing. That literally, if in like the English translation, that shit is like, they're like, yeah, they're green.
No, I've
I'm
I've already gone through Broccolon in the books, in the English version of the books, and
okay.
they're not green.
Really
There's no mention
interesting,
of them being green.
yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah. It might also
There
be
is
just.
something about her sweating, though, right? I'm not
Yeah.
making that up.
No, I think because they're
Okay.
running through the forest and then Geralt
Yeah.
is complaining about the fact that he can't keep up.
Yeah, and there was something I know that the only difference between her was that, yeah, that she either sweat and dryads don't sweat, or again,
because
that could
she's
always be
not.
just,
Yeah, because she's not fully conversed,
yeah,
transformed at that point yet.
yeah.
She
Okay,
doesn't have the stamina. Yeah.
okay. We got that settled.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um. Yeah, we already talked about it a little bit, but there's a lot of like lore, big chunk lore texts in Gwent itself. You already mentioned that you try to not keep it into account, but do you actually go through it once at least, or is that just something that you leave to the side indefinitely? Or
Like I read through like the journeys. Like I would read through the journeys when them came out, and that was something to do because I took a couple years off. I was a high school basketball coach and a teacher, and I went and coached college basketball. And then after I got done coaching college basketball, I actually wanted to write for TV and like screenwriting. So I took off like 2 years and just like 9 hours a day, like a full time job. Of course, I obviously wasn't getting paid for it. I just wrote, and so I wrote, like a dozen screenplays, all of this stuff. And when the Yen Journey came out, the Yen Journey did not have a story with it. It just had the pictures. And I
Mhm.
was like, hey, I'm just going to write. And I was like, I know this. Look at the pictures. Okay, they're telling Yen's story. And I was like, I'm going to write one. And so for like that season, or that journey, if you will, like each image on there, I wrote a little story for it and actually had Lionheart read it off. Like he narrated it and put that up on his YouTube. And something like that was fun because I just used it as a writing like challenge. Like I wasn't gonna write that and be like, oh, I'm gonna try to make this just as good as CDPR. Oh, I'm gonna use this to get hired. Like, no, it was just a fun
Mhm.
writing thing. I was like, I'm gonna sit down for 30 minutes and I'm gonna write this. I think it'd be like 5, 6, 700 words, something like that. And I'm like, I let it sit for a day, go back, and then go back over it for like 30 minutes, and then just like send it to him, and we'll do it. And something like that, is just like fun to do to kind of again combine both things, that people might care about. But like the journeys, I mean, I think they're fine, with what they do. Like again, I might have like the pitchforks at me, or people be like, "What?" I love the Witcher books, but and again, it's probably a translation thing. These are written in Polish. I'm sure in Polish it's very different, but the English translation, these aren't like these great opuses, these magnum opuses of writing. Like, it's fun writing, it's fun, it's interesting, but this isn't fucking Shakespeare. This isn't Voltaire. This isn't anything like that. That's gonna be just, dude, this is life-changing prose, man. No, like, there's a lot that we talked about before that we like. There's a lot that Sapkowski's writing. I'm like, this is fucking terrible. What the hell is going on? Why is he repeating himself? Why is he saying this again? Why is he going into another long, drawn-out paragraph that ends with, in the middle, somebody reinstates the question. So you ask me why I'm doing this. This is why I'm doing it. He does that over and over and over and over and over again with different characters. And so it's not like Sapkowski's this just, hold up to the heavens kind of thing. So obviously, what CDPR does, I think it's fine. It's good. It gets people in. And hopefully it gets people to read the books.
Indeed. There's also a lot of points where he starts a chapter, Sapkowski then starts a chapter, and it takes you like 2.5 pages to realize from which point of view that you're viewing the situation in right now. And then he ends it with like, yeah, and he has white hair. Ah, okay, it's Geralt. Fine, okay. We can move on now.
Yeah, the point of view is also, there's somewhere it does, it's like it's not even in a point of view. It kind of can dance around. And then there's also, like I said, with the Lady Lake, which is my favorite. It'll end and they'll put that asterisk, and then it'll go to like 2 sentences in a complete different time and place, to a complete different person. And then it'll go back like 40 years to where you were. And then go back again to somebody else 20 years. And then, and like that stuff going over and over and over again can be a bit much.
Maybe something I want to go back to. You said you wrote a version of Yennefer's journey, so to speak. Did you get any positive or any feedback on that from fans, or?
Yeah, like, people said, they liked it. I know, like, comments, Lionheart, that he said he liked it, which is good because he was reading it off.
Luckily.
But yeah, but it's kind of one of those, pretty much. But it was, what I kind of did too was, it was my, if you will, reference to the books. I wasn't just going to rephrase what Sapkowski said, like, it was more or less, okay, here's the last wish, and it talks, it's Geralt and Yen together, what they're going to do, all that. I can then put my own view on it from, like, if I was seeing it, like someone told me this story, I can then rephrase certain things in there. And I wasn't going to change anything that he did, like, majorly. You can just throw in a couple things to do, different couple lines or something like that to put in, or stuff, to maybe hit on. Because I don't even remember, because that was like a year and a half ago. Like, that was somewhere in the first half of last year. I don't even remember too much. I know they had it like as the deformed, like the hunchback kind of, deformed, and something like that is good or fun because that wasn't in the books.
Nope.
That was something that she just talked about afterwards. That's something the show got to put in there. So stuff like that, kind of put your own spin on, something you like. And again, it's not saying, oh, I'm going to do this better. Of course, I can't do it better, but I can just do something else that, again, maybe people can say, oh, is that what happened? I'll go read that short story.
Considering it's open season when it comes to Sapkowski's level of writing, I have to say I agree with the points you made. And there is also what I would say excessive use of violence in his books. Like, sometimes you read about what Geralt is doing and you think, okay, punching that guy in the face will do the trick, and Geralt just decapitates him, and you're like, why? What for? It was completely unnecessary. That's one thing. And then the worst example of his writing was probably early on in his books. I think it was The Last Wish. The sequence, the dialogue between Geralt and Renfri when she sneaks into the mayor's house. That was the cheapest romance sequence ever. Like, the dialogue.
There's a lot of, I was gonna say, yeah, there's a lot of men writing women of Sapkowski. Again, this is a boomer from the 80s and 90s writing pulpy, like, Polish sci-fi. So to some in there, you're right. Like I can early on, I can be like, okay, I can kind of forgive that. But when certain things happen later on, like we talked about, like the last book or the one before that, yeah, I just read it and I'm like, all right, this is a cringe, bro, kind of thing, where it's a guy, he's writing hot women, maybe he's a little horny that day or something, and the editor was like, I will leave it in. Guys love this shit, right? That's the only thing I can think of. Like, he knows his audience, and judging by a lot of what happens in the games, especially the first game where you can collect cards
Oh boy.
for the women that you hook up with. It's like, yeah, I guess there might be an audience here that he might know that audience.
Yeah,
What do you?
when you said that, it instantly reminded me of the comments I started making when I decided to read the books for the third time. I read them for the first time when I was like 10, 11, and I didn't understand jack shit. I was just too young for it. Then I gave it a go when I was about 18, and I loved it. Then I decided to reread them when I was in my 30s, and I started to see all the flaws in the books. So that's when I thought, okay, I'm not part of his target audience. I'm too old now. And another thing about that is Yennefer. When I read the books for the first and second time, I hated Yennefer. But as I was getting older, I started to like her more and more. So there is something about that as well. Like, her character, I think, is more attractive to people who are getting older because you can kind of see what she's doing there.
Yeah, there was actually someone yesterday that came up and I asked them what are they were in the chat and stream and they just finished The Witcher 3 and I'm like, "Oh, what ending do you get?" And we got Ciri Witcher and ended with Triss. I'm like, well, you got half of a good ending." And then she was saying, she was like, "Oh no, like I hate it. Like in this," she was like, "Yeah, Yen's a bitch. Don't like her." And I'm like, "Yeah, that's because whoever ultimately," and this is something that we'll eventually get to. I try to stay as positive as possible, 100%. It's something we'll eventually cover, like on the podcast. But to me, it's very clear whoever was the overarching story design, whatever, for The Witcher 3 clearly did not like Yen and like Triss. Like 100%. That's what it is. Because that's one thing about the games. Yen is hard. She has a rough edge to her. But in the game, she is so over the top with it. And like so many times you can respond as Geralt to be like, man, you're a bitch. Or other people being like, man, Yen's kind of a bitch, isn't she? And I'm like, I don't think these people have grasped why Yen is that way,
Mm-hmm.
and two, why she acts that way to Geralt in the books. She's not doing it because she's a bitch. Like she's doing it one because she had a very traumatic childhood. So there's other things to get into there. And two, a lot of stuff Geralt does, like from a shard of ice, she does it to get Geralt to do something. She does it either to make a point or there's something maybe that Geralt did. And I just think such of that is lost on like a men's point of view. Like the masculine point of view is why is this woman not taking her clothes off? Why does she just want to bang? Like everything else can be. And I get into the weeds with all of this, but I can just tell most people that have not read the books, and it's based on what they think of Yen. And if they're like, "Oh, she's a bitch," blah blah blah, I'm like, "Okay, you have not read the books. You just haven't." Like, and that's fine. It's fine. CDPR has portrayed Yen like so much more negatively than I feel they should have, and they've portrayed Triss so much more positively than they should have.
Yep.
And that's kind of just skewed people on that.
I still have a script on my hard drive somewhere for a video that I planned to make that was just titled How CDPR Wasted Yennefer in The Witcher 3.
No, they did 100. Like it's the number one thing about the game. Otherwise, I would say The Witcher 1 and The Witcher 2, by not having Yen or Ciri in it, to me, they're not even fucking Witcher games.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you don't have Yen or Ciri in your story, you don't know The Witcher. They are intrinsically, especially Ciri, they're intrinsically part of The Witcher. So when The Witcher 3 did that, put Ciri to the forefront, I'm like, oh, good. Like, this is cool. Someone who actually loves and gets the books and wants to pay a tribute to them is actually doing it. It might have been the same person. I don't fucking know. Maybe they're actually like doing it. But then you're right. Like replaying through it, I'm like, how would anybody even like Yen the way she's fully portrayed in The Witcher 3? Like if you didn't know anything about her, of course you're not going to like her. The first time I played through the game, I didn't know anything about The Witcher. Of course I picked Triss. Why would you pick Yen over Triss if you know nothing about the background of The Witcher?
Yep.
And not
'Cause she
only
gets-
that, if you don't know what Geralt was like in the books. Because Geralt in the books and Geralt in The Witcher 3 are two different characters. At least from my point of view.
Okay, like how so?
For example, in The Witcher 3, you don't really see any of that, Geralt wasting his coin on literally booze and hookers. You don't see Geralt being a dramatic teenager. You don't see Geralt being overly grumpy the way he is in the books, especially when interacting with other members of the Hansa. Like, how many times did Geralt proclaim he's leaving the Hansa to find Ciri on his own because that's the right thing to do? Like 6, 7 times at least.
And how did they respond to him?
They basically didn't listen to him.
They're like, shut the fuck up.
The
Dude.
way you are
Hashtag
not
ignore.
going to listen to a teenager.
No, dude, I 1,000,000% agree with you, and it's my number one problem with the Netflix series is Geralt from the books, Geralt from the games, and Geralt from the games and Geralt from Netflix are much more similar to each other. It's brooding, brooding, sulking, angry white dude, angry white lone wolf, blah blah blah. Like it can be so fucking boring. And Geralt from the books, like we said before, he's a mopey, whiny bitch. He whines so much. He'll just get drunk when he's sad. He goes on these super long philosophical diatribes. And if you were just reading the book for the first time, be like, is that Geralt waxing nostalgically for this or waxing philosophically about all this? Geralt is so much better in the books. And I know it's gonna be one of those like, oh, you're just in the book. No. I'm like, yes, because I don't care like what he does I don't care that the books he only fights like a few monsters. Like that's fine, whatever. Again, once you get past the short stories, it's not about Monster Slayer. It's not. And I get why you have to put monsters in a game. It's a video game. You have to have that stuff. It has to be interesting. You have to upgrade your sword and level up and do all that. It's fine. I'm not comparing it in that sense. But Geralt is so, and I love Doug Cockle's representation of it. Whatever, he's great. I love him more in The Witcher 2. I think The Witcher 2, he's a bit more emotional, if you will. And I tried to play The Witcher 1, but that was fucking terrible. I'm sorry, Erdem, who was in chat earlier. I'm sorry. The Witcher 1 is unplayable. I tried to do it last month. Sorry, I can't do it. But in going back to like the Netflix series, I just like it's too bland. Geralt is just so bland, and that's not him. It's just not him for reasons that you stated.
Yeah. So if you only play the games, you only know part of the story. And I always tell people, if you pick Triss over Yen, you clearly didn't read the books. Like anyone who read the books has to pick Yen over Triss. 10 out of 10 times.
Or and it's something I've actually grown more accustomed to, you don't pick either of them. You don't pick either of them. Like Stag Geralt, because again, I'm sorry, I got junk in my throat. Like Yen and Geralt may not be good for each other. Both of them did bad things to each other. They both love Ciri 100%. But I can absolutely buy and even subscribe to they're not together. Like it's okay. Like I know they did all the way and they ended up at the end of the books together and it was a happy ending. However that went down, however you believe, whatever happened with what Ciri said. But in that sense it's fine. But like with what the way by bringing them back, it's kind of hard to bring them back in general. But I can see where you're just like, I'm not going to pick any of them. But yes, what Triss did to Geralt And to me, like, it's not even it. Whatever, magical or Schalt, whatever you want to call it. I don't like. Fine, whatever. Geralt's a big boy. He can take care of himself. Blah 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 blah. But what Ciri did, what Triss did to Ciri by selling out Ciri to the Lodge and picking Philippa and the Lodge over Ciri was unforgivable. And Yen even says that in the books. She's like, "Are you sure you want to do this, Triss?" And Triss is like, "Forget." This is after Triss and Philippa are very clearly just hooked up. Like they're having sex. 100% they just had sex. Or they were in the middle of it, whatever. And it's heavily implied. And basically Yen is like, "All right, Triss, is this your decision?" And Triss, "Forgive me, Yen, forgive me." And she basically goes, "Never," and leaves. And yes, at the end with Marigold's Hellstorm, they have their. It was very cheap, if I want to be honest. It's very cheap. Yen and Triss have their reconciliation at the end, where Triss saves Yen's life. Right, at the whatever happens. I won't tell that part exactly what happens. So they have that. So at the end of the books, they are kind of on even terms. That felt kind of cheap to me. But yeah, what Triss did to Ciri to me is unforgivable.
Let's just say the Golden Dragon was right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Kind of.
Old Borch.
But you know what's the biggest crime against the lore in The Witcher 3? The relationship between Yennefer and Ciri in the game.
Okay.
There's nothing there.
Yeah, I was just about to say, what
Like,
are you referring to?
Like, where is all that motherly love? You know, and where is Ciri calling Yennefer Mama? Like, where is all of
She
that?
did call her that though. She did when they it's very cheap again, you're right. They didn't do anything, they didn't show anything, they just said it. When she gets back to Kaer Morhen, I think she says like mother or mom, because I always reflected on that. She always said that about Yen, but she never called Geralt like father or like dad or anything like that. At least I can remember. But I want to say when they first got back, when they're reuniting, that she says like mama or something like that, because she says sister to Triss, I believe.
No, I don't think she says anything of that sort to Yen, which is
Okay.
a crime against the books, because in the books she almost constantly calls Yennefer either Mama or Mommy.
Okay. Someone in chat watch that and see, because I could have
find
sworn when I replayed it, I was like, oh, she said mama or mommy. But yeah, somebody watch that real quick. Dude, because if I'm wrong about that, then Jesus Christ, my brain is just broken as far as remembering stuff. Or I just want to remember things. I'm getting Mandela affected all over the place now. Stuff I want to save. I just create these memories.
Yeah, I think it always boils down to the fact that Yennefer was very underutilized, to put it mildly. Because I think, aside from her introduction at the beginning, which is also very brusque and basically, I don't care that you've been looking for me for the past few years. I'm with the evil empire now. Bye. And then you can't see her. I think if you don't specifically go to Skellige, it could take you up to 50 hours if you're side questing before you see her again.
That's why I picked Triss when I first played, because Yennefer's there and they talk about this history. Of course, I don't fucking know that history. And you go to Vizima, and then next up is you go to Velen and then Novigrad. And I did Velen first, like most people, and then I went to Novigrad. And when you get to Novigrad, it's the Triss show. And you're all with Triss, and Triss is hot, and you get to hook up with her. So I'm like, okay, my first love of The Witcher 3 was Triss. And that's what I mean, like when you talked about the way the game was made, like the game sets you up to be with Triss, and it sets up your first playthrough to be with Triss. It makes her seem more important than Yennefer, because you're right, you get 15 minutes of cutscenes with Yen, and then dozens of hours with Triss, and then you go meet Yen, and everything's supposed to be like, oh yeah, we're lovers. And I remember being like, well, no, I'm with that redhead girl back in Novigrad. Like I ain't with you. So the way that was set up just definitely seemed against it.
Yeah, or even the blonde one in Velen. She's also heavily featured during multiple side quests. Kira in the
Kira
first
Metz.
introduction, and then
but Kira Metz was into Geralt already in the books.
Yeah, indeed. So that was a nice side note, but she gets way more screen time than even 30, 40 hours before you meet the Yennefer again.
But for the record, I did attempt on playing the game in different orders. So instead of going to Velden first, I went to Novigrad, and oh boy, it was fucking hard. Because first and foremost, you can't go straight to Novigrad. Like, you can't. You have to have the pass.
The pass, yeah.
Yeah, and the quest to obtain the pass is too difficult. Especially if you are playing Breaking Bones or the highest difficulty. It's just too difficult. You can't do it. So you have to swim across to Novigrad, but you can't swim too close to the bridge or the Barbican or whatever, because they're going to shoot you. So yeah, finally you get to Novigrad, and you have to do the Triss quest. Like, there's no other way. Otherwise, you're not gonna progress with the story. And I spent like 2 hours fighting those witch hunters in the warehouse, because I was like level, I don't know, 5, 6, whatever, and they were like level 12, 13. And 2 blows and they could potentially kill you. So it took a lot of fighting and rolling over. Oh man, like, I do not recommend. I did try, but I do not recommend.
Jeez. Yeah, I'll leave that to y'all.
But speaking of Novigrad, because we digress all the time here, and I actually want to get at least some of these questions out there. Syndicate, because we know that the devs can make extensive use of their creative freedom. And then we have the Syndicate faction, which is not based on the Witcher novels at all. There's very few characters in that faction that do appear in the books or even in the games, and even fewer of them are in any form or shape tied to the crime world of Novigrad. So my question is, did the devs do a good job creating this faction and kind of creating even more lore for the universe, in your opinion?
I love the Syndicate idea, like Syndicate in The Witcher 3. I love this idea of crime groups fighting over control, but having to keep an uneasy peace, and they can't make too much noise or else eventually be cracked down, and that it's a free city too, so they don't have to worry about a king or anybody just coming in and doing anything. As far as Gwent goes, I hate the Syndicate faction. It's, to me, where I can honestly point to the number one part where I started liking the game less. I don't like the idea of a faction that's completely different than anybody else. Like, they're playing a different game with coins and spending and tributes and all that. I absolutely hate it. If I could snap my fingers and get rid of Syndicate and Gwent, I would in a heartbeat. But no, as far as the lore goes, actually for a little bit ran a DM'd a D&D campaign set in the Witcher universe that I actually tied it into this because I love the Syndicate so much. Like, this one guy was playing as Skelligan, if you will. And I'm like, okay, well, he runs a shop in Novigrad. I'm going to tie him to the Tide Cloaks. And so, I had Tide Cloaks in there, people I created, and then had Gudrun, I think that's her name, right?
Mm-hmm.
Gudrun Bjornsdotter. Okay, so like she was in there, and I'm like, oh, this is fun. And they have to they had to fight like some, what are Horson's people?
The cut-ups.
Cut-ups, yeah. They had to like fight some cut-ups. And so stuff like that, like I love it. Like, that's a great addition. That was one of my favorite things playing back through Novigrad, was just this crime syndicate in this prosperous free city.
Speaking of Gudrun, there is actually 2 more Gudruns in the books and the games. The first one is in the Tower of Swallows, when I think it's in Novigrad, or maybe it's already in Skellige, where Triss listens to a story of a sorceress falling from the skies, and one of the women who are commenting on that story over and over again, or even telling the story, is Gudrun. But it's probably a different Gudrun. And then in The Witcher 3, when you are visiting Ziggy Reuven's bathhouse, there is another Gudrun. Or there's a mention of another Gudrun. Allegedly working there or being part of that organization.
Oh, well, I guess that slipped through. Oh, that's right. She's not actually in The Witcher 3. She's just in Gwent.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. The Tide Cloak. Okay.
Yeah.
Because Hammond... Yeah, because Hammond is actually in Skellige. And then they tied him to. They made him a tide cloak, I guess, to have like when they were doing the cards.
Speaking of Hammond, I still cannot forgive CDPR for not making any Top Gear references there. Like, we have Hammond, but we don't have Clarkson or May. This doesn't feel right.
Okay.
Doesn't feel right.
Oh, that'd be funny if his henchmen. Oh, you're right. His henchmen should have been, Clarkson and May. And May's like really slow, and Clarkson's just an asshole.
Or they're all pirate captains with each their own custom ship.
Ah, there you go. There you go. That's great. Maybe for the next game.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, I mean, Syndicate could be described as a faction where practicality kind of beats the lore. But there are other factions in Gwent specifically where that kind of happens as well. Like, for example, the Dwarves of Mahakam and wild animals being part of Scoia'tael. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, Scoia'tael, like they put in someone like, a leader at the time, Bruver Hugh, who was a leader of Scoia'tael, hated the Scoia'tael. And it's just one of those, like, we'll just ignore it. I mean, Scoia'tael very clearly were elder races, if you want to call them that, or non-humans something. But there were, some humans like the Hawkers, Havokers, whatever, or that worked with them. So I think that's just, it's one of those now, it's just the cat's out of the bag kind of thing, where it started as Scoia'tael, but then they didn't make other factions from it. So, it's whatever.
I'm going to interrupt you here because the dwarves did not start in Scoia'tael. If you play Gwent in The Witcher 3, you'll notice the dwarves were part of Northern Realms.
Did they? In like closed beta they were?
Not in closed beta, in The Witcher 3 Gwent.
Oh, in The Witcher 3. Oh,
Yarpen and all the boys, they were part of
Were they?
Yep.
Interesting.
Because in the books, Mahakam is a vassal state of Temeria. And as you said, you have Bruver, who is overwhelmingly against Scoia'tael. He even forbids the youth of leaving Mahakam and joining Scoia'tael. There is Polly, who actually dies at the hand of a Scoia'tael fighter, and not to mention Yarpen and other dwarves fighting the Battle of Brenna against the Scoia'tael.
Shahirwood was a big thing that was left out of the show that I was very, very sad to see, that whole wagon attack. Mm-hmm. And that'll always be near and dear to me, old Reagan.
Yeah, because it's so important to set the tone of the disparity between the different non-human factions for that entire conflict, that it's kind of lost on most viewers then.
Yeah, because in the end, if you look at dwarves and elves, they are not a monolith. You have elves basically not even speaking Elder because they've lived in human settlements for so long, and their parents did, and their grandparents, and so on. You have elves, and that you cannot see that in Gwent or even in The Witcher 3. For example, Ida, right? Ida in the books, even other elves are surprised seeing her because she lives somewhere in the Blue Mountains and she's a sage. And nobody really knows the elves from there. They're like, hiding in the mountains doing their own thing, never really came in contact with the humans. So there's a lot of factions within each race, and they don't even necessarily agree with one another. So kind of dumping them in a single faction in Gwent feels awkward.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty clear they just needed it for synergy, dwarf synergy, elf synergy. So I mean, I guess again, like when you have something as streamlined as Scoia'tael, you kind of can't win with it anyway.
Yeah, and speaking of factions, there's always one question that kind of keeps popping up, and that's the potential new faction in Gwent. Do you see that happening in the future? Do you think there's enough Witcher lore to create another faction, or would it be something more like Syndicate where they have to basically create it from the scratch because there's nothing they could base it on?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Everyone says Zerrikania, but there's really like nothing from. They would have to be all basically brand new, except you could put in TNV or something like that from like Villain Trent Mirthal. Obviously not him, but Tia and Vea would be from there.
Mhm.
I mean, the biggest thing I always wanted just from like the lore aspect was just more bandits. You know, you could have like Homer, the Nightingales in there, the rats, obviously. You could just, all the people from the rats, all that would be like your legendaries. But that's all neutral, and obviously they're going ham on neutral cards, so maybe not. Maybe they won't have another faction. You figure they'd have to be, but I have no idea. That's up for them designers, of which I know dick about.
I think Jason Slama, when he was still the director, he said 6 is a very tidy number, so they're gonna keep it that way.
Yeah, and it's one thing that, and I know you know, because I know you've played the World War II card game Cards.
Yeah.
And like I play that game now more than I play Gwent, and the lore also is very good in that game. But one thing I love about that is you have your main factions, and then you can have a supporting faction, and you can pick a supporting faction from any of the other main factions, and then there's some that are just supporting factions. So you can have like Britain, Japan, and you can kind of mix things in there, and you can't have the legendary or elite cards from your supporting one. And something like that I think is kind of cool as a way to kind of make things different. Obviously maybe like harder to balance in that sense, but that would be something I think could be kind of fun. But now I think you obviously can't do that because it would just be, some things would be beyond broken. But I don't know, maybe the game's broken as it is at times and they fixed it, so why not?
It's also the case in Legends of Runeterra, where you can build a deck consisting of 2 factions. So it's not only cards; it's also LOR, and it is an idea that's been being discussed in the Gwent community. But as you said, potentially it would create a very broken meta, unless they would create something like a new game mode that's not meant to be competitive, where you can do that, or maybe like expanded arena, because in arena you had to pick 1 card out of 3, right? And maybe there could be a game mode where basically devs say, okay, you have your collection, you can build a deck consisting of any card. So you can pick from all the other factions as you please. That will create something new, but again, that couldn't be competitive.
I mean, it would be nice to have, because we have seasonal already, so that isn't really regulated because that's filled with broken combos. So I don't see any limiting factor to just add a new game mode where you can go all out deck building wise as well. But yeah, aside from factions, in general, what does your Gwent wishlist look like for cards that were still missing? Events, places, characters, Brett.
I mean, they put like I don't know if they're gonna do scenarios anymore, but scenarios would have been great for like Stiga Castle, for Brenna, for stuff like that. It would be kind of fun to kind of put in. I already mentioned before, like the bandits would be it, just more. If I was gonna say just like book characters, that would kind of just be cool, whatever they could do. But as far as like the like events in place, I know they're still doing locations, obviously. Like Stiga Castle was just kind of funny because it's like, oh, it's Stiga Castle, and it's the Scoia'tael like location,
Yeah.
if you will. And I'm like, oh well, because that's in like Nilfgaard area. But it's like, okay, they had to put it somewhere. That's fine. And just stuff like that. I don't know. I mentioned like Nightingales, like Homer Stragan, I think was his name, or something like that. The rats, the have a bunch of people go crazy over a missile card, something like that. Other than that, I think that's just kind of Boreas Munn would be fun. I call him the Forrest Gump of The Witcher. He
Yeah,
kind of just
basically.
pops up everywhere he needs to be to get an outside viewpoint. That'd be a fun character, or fun card.
Yeah.
Oh, people have been asking for Essie for a very long time now.
Yeah.
Not to mention the Renfrey guy.
I was just about to say Renfrey was the biggest example there.
And nobody really remembers his name. It's Dr. Korchit, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, everyone just knows him as the Renfrey guy.
Yeah, the Renfrey appreciation posts.
Yeah, it's been how many cards already? 400 something? It's been well over a year.
I think they're doing it on purpose right now. Same with Dagon. just
Oh yeah,
ignoring
yeah.
everybody yelling
Just to
about
test
Dago.
his limits, see how long he can hold on. But it's actually funny what you mentioned about Stiga Castle being part of this Collateral faction while actually being in Nilfgaard. I think most of the Witcher Skull's castles, the fortresses, are now located in the Nilfgaard. Right? Because the School of the Viper, obviously Gorthugveit, obviously was created for the purpose of the Witcher 2 and 3. That's located in Nilfgaard. Stiga Castle, which was the original seat of the School of the Cat, is located in Nilfgaard. School of the Bear in the Amel Mountains is also in Nilfgaard. Just across the border.
I guess it does take up like a massive part of the continent, so I guess it does make sense that they'll actually be put in there.
Yeah. Not only that, because you have, for example, the story of Visigoda, right? Visigoda, originally a Nordling, who worked at the Academy of Oxenford, and he was exiled from the north. He ended up in Nilfgaard, and he committed some crimes there against the Empire, so he was exiled from the Empire too. And the problem that he was facing over and over again, wherever he went, sooner or later, that place became part of the Empire. So once again, he was part of the imperial jurisdiction, so he had to flee again.
Just found himself out in a swamp.
Yep. Which also was part of Nilfgaard at that point.
Yeah. At that point, it's just whatever. He's old enough. Somebody finds him. He'll deal with it.
That actually makes me think about the fact that maybe the Witchers themselves could be a good separate faction, because for some reason they spread them out over all the other factions, but most of them don't really make too much sense being part of one specific faction. But then again, there are a lot of things in Gwent that don't really match to the books. Can you see any other examples, Brett, that would fit that inconsistency?
Not. I mean, just like I said, some of the art, but I mean, I can't think of anything that would just be egregious, like an affront. Like it makes sense, like something like Igni. Hey, it burns, gets rid of it. Okay, Ard pushes things. Stuff like that would be. I don't know if there's anybody. I'm sure I could probably think of, or something could maybe come to mind. But is there any that y'all have off the top of your head?
No, not.
Well, I know one thing that was like Stregobor. Stregobor was like a master of weather. So the Stregobor card would have made sense to create weather, create rain, do all that. Like it's what Avalok's card does, right?
Yeah.
So Stregobor to do that would be like, okay, that would have made sense. Like it's kind of his thing, but again, it's not a big deal.
Actually, now
But
that
it's
you
just one of
said
those.
it, we have a new card called Yennefer Illusionist. And as far as I know, Yennefer was not an illusionist in the books. Fringilla was an illusionist. And her card does not reflect that at all.
Yeah. I guess it was.
Yeah, go ahead, Brett.
No, I was gonna say. I guess they just whatever. They had the design. They needed a yen card, so they just put it on there.
Yeah. I think it would have been better to call it creationist, because that's basically what she does, especially with a Shard of Ice, where she creates those crows specifically for the.
Does creationist mean anything where y'all live or at?
I'm probably missing something then if I said
I think it means
wrong.
a lot of. I think it has very specific meaning in the US, politically speaking.
Well, no, I mean, it's not really even politically, but yeah, if a creationist in the U.S. is basically people that like don't believe in evolution. They believe the world is like 6,000 to 8,000 years old, like that, like very biblically based.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling for us because in European schools we just teach evolution.
It gets taught here too. Like it gets taught even here in Texas. Like each school, there's a lot of local power. People tend to think in the United States like this, the federal government has this say. No, it's states and then it's local. Like in Texas here, and it's, a pretty conservative area, like evolution is taught in biology. Like it is. It's not like they're not slamming Bible over people's head saying, hey, believe, believe. I'm sure out in some like rural areas, maybe not so much. But yeah, if you called Yen Creationist would have a ton of memes. So I really wish it would have been called that now.
Yeah.
Yeah, she would instantly hold a Bible in her hand.
What it is, create. Oh man.
I think you're getting the point, but I just meant that Yennefer creates stuff from nothing.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what they thought about, right? That's the idea they had. Wow, Yennefer creationist, and then a member of their staff who's from the US was like, guys, no, just no.
Probably not a good idea. Yeah.
Which actually brings me to the next question, which is about tags and keywords, kind of missing or being misaligned with the character. For example, Morvran not being an aristocrat despite being a full-blood aristocrat in The Witcher 3, and then the Gwent description, or for example, Jan Kalvite not being a soldier despite being the commander of the manga division, who actually had to patrol the Korathi Desert. So that there is a lot of stuff there, and some of this obviously for balance purposes, right? Like if you give Morvran or any other leader aristocrat, then obviously they will be worried. Okay, then now you can proc ball twice in the same turn, and we don't want that. But do you think there's more attacks like that? And what's your take on them?
I mean, if I had to nitpick just from like a historical standpoint, I don't like knight and soldier being together or being on the same card. Like if you're a soldier, you're not a knight. Like if you're knighted, you're not a soldier. Like once you get attained, if you're a knight, then you're some form of at least unlanded nobility. You've been raised to that level. You're not a soldier. Like you're right though. They have to do it for synergetic purposes that they can do with both. It can be a buff. So I'm not saying like, oh, rah, rah, rah. I'm gonna be, about all this. No, but like when I see knight and soldier together, I'm just like, I don't really care for that.
You know what's even worse? Cards being knights and aristocrats at the same time. God damn it! Every knight is an aristocrat.
Because it's kind of the same, yeah.
Like only members of the nobility could be knighted.
But see, I guess what they would say would be aristocrat is just a higher version of nobility, because there is no like nobility tag, that kind of would be it. But you could have like a regular person could be knighted, like they could be unlanded, they just become like a knight errant, like they could be raised to it like a battlefield commission, if you will. It obviously was very, very rarely done, but it's something that it could happen, which is why I guess they just do it. Because I'm trying to even think like, I think Kidweni Knight is Soldier Knight, right? Isn't it like both? And like Ordo, I think Reynard Ordo is as well. Yeah. And I know it's for the synergy of it, but I'm just like...
Kahir is everything. Kahir, Soldier Knight, and Aristocrat.
He's Soldier Knight, Aristocrat, Human. He's got them all.
Yeah,
is that the most tags? That's got to be the most tags, right?
Yeah, that's the most tags, 4.
Gotta be.
And then we have the beast not being a beast,
which actually makes sense.
Yeah, I know, but why call it the beast?
Because that's what she was called. I think it's a she. That's what she was called in The Witcher 1. The beast.
It's still funny
because it's a specter, like a specter.
It's a ghost.
Yeah. That was created by.
It's still a ghost dog.
People's awful deeds.
Yeah, that's funny.
Yeah. That was actually one of the most Witchery stories in the whole Witcher franchise, at least the game part of it. Like you really felt the Witcher vibes doing that story.
Yeah, there you
go. Yeah, we had one more question about journeys, but I think we talked a lot about the writing of the journeys already. But maybe just a quick question: if you have any, which of the journeys was your favorite so far?
I mean, obviously the one I wrote, so I'm gonna say that again.
Yeah. Okay, moving
Yeah,
on.
we'll go with that one, the one that I wrote.
Yeah, from the lore perspective, I have to admit I only read the Geralt one and the Ciri one, but the problem was, if you are reading these specific journeys, you are basically reading parts of the books. Like they didn't do anything special. They just took specific segments of the novels, threw them into the journeys. That's it. But when it comes to cosmetics, I definitely like the Yennefer journey. Because it's different. People complain about it being recolors and whatnot, but I like the modest approach there. I really like that journey.
The Aretusa one was fun lore-wise, just because it told the same story, but from a different perspective, which was nice.
Oh yeah.
And then Alzur was basically spreading out a bit of the lore surrounding that mystical figure that's always referenced but never really talked about. Aside from in Season of Storms a little bit.
Yeah, Alzur and all that. Just thrown in there, Season of Storms.
Oh yeah, just out of nowhere completely.
Yeah, Season of Storms is...
It was not a great book.
Nah. It's not worth discussing even.
Yeah, to be honest, because
excessive
Sapkowski
violence.
also wrote other books, not only The Witcher, he also wrote the Hussite the trilogy.
Oh, Hussites, that's what it was.
Hussite trilogy. Yeah. And the first book was great. Like it was fun to read. But then the second and the third book were basically the same. It was like one battle after another. The main character dies, but then it kind of turns out he didn't die and he survived and escaped. Yeah, it was boring. Really boring. And Season of Storms kind of follows that trend. But before we end the actual Gwent segment, there's one thing I would like to discuss, and that's the project Golden Necker. We don't know almost anything about it. We've seen some artwork. We know it's going to be a single player. What are your predictions?
I mean, I have no idea as far as predictions go. I know it's supposed to be single player or something like that. Going back to like cards, one thing they did is they had that campaign, single player campaigns, where you went over a major campaign from each country. And like the United States was Battle of Guadalcanal, the Germans was El Alamein, and the Philippines were like Japan. And you play through this, and it gives you this like massive, like actual history about these. And they're not going to do this at all, but that would be fun if they did that. And it was based on, like we talked about, Battle of Brenna, and it's a single player thing, and it's Nilfgaard, and you play Nilfgaard cards, or whatever, throughout the Battle of Brenna. And with that, you could also do, Northern Realms for Brenna, because they won it. That might be a little bit better to do when you win, as opposed to get smashed in. But just stuff like that, I think, would be fun. Scoia'tael, it can be just some story where it's a Scoia'tael campaign, they're fighting something. It could be during a war, it could be by itself. Something like that, I think, would be really good, that they could use their own lore from. They could create their own lore with it, and they can use stuff from the books as well. Again, I do not think in any way that's the way it's going to be, but that's what would excite me the most.
Yeah, the only problem being it's not going to be included in Gwent. It's going to be a separate title that you have to download from GOG or Steam. And probably there's not even going to be a link to Gwent in that game. So it's a separate game that you have to buy to play, and it's not going to be part of Gwent. Unlike, for example, Path of Champions, which is part of Runeterra.
What kind of game is it supposed to be?
We don't know. That's why I asked about the predictions.
I just assumed it was going to be a card game.
Yeah, it's probably going to be a card game because it's going to feature cards. But what kind of puzzle game? People speculate. People think maybe something like Slay the Spire or something like that.
Oh yeah.
Or the Darkest Dungeon. We simply don't know.
Yeah, that's true.
I'm still holding out hope that it's like Thronebreaker, but
no, they already said they don't want another Thronebreaker because that was so niche.
That failed.
Yeah, they did, and they failed mostly because of the decisions they made regarding Gwent, right? Because they started promoting Thronebreaker and they said it's coming out this year. And then somewhere in between they said, this whole Gwent thing is not going too well. So they announced Homecoming, and because of that, Thronebreaker basically got delayed by a year because they announced it, I think, in 2017 before Midwinter. And Midwinter was a failure, and a couple of patches after that were a failure, and then Homecoming happened. So Thronebreaker was released then, a year after its planned release, and you cannot salvage a project like this. No, it doesn't matter how much money you throw at the marketing department, you cannot salvage it. It's done. When you delay a game by a year without effectively communicating with the player base, it's done.
Yeah, but like you said, when people ask about playing Thronebreaker because they like The Witcher, I'm like, do you play or like card games? No. I'm like, okay, then don't play it. Like, you're not gonna like it. It's a card game. It's a single player card game.
Even if you like card games, you are likely not going to enjoy it because it's more of a puzzle.
True.
It's like,
yeah,
you are basically playing Sudoku.
That seems a bit harsh, but
oh yeah, but yeah, it's not exactly a card game.
It's basically like playing Gwent with a very limited selection of cards and then finding the most OP combinations and then doing that over and over and over again.
Oh yeah.
Aside from the few puzzles that are in between that are really interesting, where they play around with the concept a bit. But I still feel like it's one of their CDPR's better stories that they made within the Witcher universe.
Yeah, the story was great because its foundations were in the books, right? Like we know what Meath was more or less doing during the invasion, so they already got the blueprint. They needed to hash out the details, and they did. So the story was great. The dialogue was amazing, even though originally I was very skeptical because I was like, yeah, I don't really like an older gentleman telling me the story, but it turns out to be really good. Artwork, voice lines, the maps, the areas, it was all great. The saddest part, and I think if that's the part that sucks, it's gameplay. And if your gameplay sucks, you're not going to sell your game. Because everything about that game was great except gameplay.
Indeed.
Which kind of brings me to the point that Brett made earlier in the show when he said that everything about Gwent is amazing except playing Gwent.
It's a big problem for me.
Yeah, not only for you. It's like a saying in my stream.
Yeah. I want to love it, but as far as the actual like gameplay and playing it, it's a good game to stream though. It's very good to drink and stream and not care. So I like it for that. But yeah, as far as seriously playing it, it's like, nah. That ship sailed.
All right. Then I think it maybe
it's a time to move to another segment.
To switch over from Gwent and into a few other questions.
Yeah, we have personal Q&A. The only problem being we actually are about to reach the 2-hour mark, so I'm going to leave it to our guest. Do you want some more questions, Brett, or you think I'm done for today?
No, these we answered a couple of those on there, but no, let's we can go. I won't talk as long. I'll be succinct. I promise.
Yeah, I think the first question we actually did talk about, right? Because we
did delve in that.
Yeah, because the question is about fleshing out the universe and how Sapkowski did not exactly give us a lot of detail. So yeah, we talk about that in reference to George R.R. Martin and Tolkien. The next question, though, is about non or semi-canon materials, such as manuals from the pen and paper RPG stories written by authors other than Sapkowski. For example, Claws and Fangs. Did you delve into manuals from the RPG or the board game? Did you delve into stories written by somebody else?
Yeah, actually, the tabletop RPG, I actually have all of those because those are just really cool. And I adapted them for 5e of D&D when I was doing all that. Like I would take those and just put them right into there. And so I would do that. And not just from, not just writing that journey. I wrote an audio drama, audio play, if you will, a couple of years ago, and had people from the Gwent community voice it. And it was about some like cat witcher and this like female Toussaint knight errant, and the stuff like that. Like stuff like that's fun to me. And so many people out there, it's easy to criticize things and be like, "Oh, this sucks. I can do it," but they don't fucking do it because they just consume, and that's just one of those things where it's like, I like to write. I want to get better at writing. I'll do something in there that maybe people will pay attention to. And I'm actually now, like, I've had outlines of it, but I'm in the process of another one of those that hopefully in the coming months, again, can get out, get some people to voice it. Because and going back to that first question that we didn't even go over, I don't care that he doesn't flesh it out. That's fine. Like, that leaves more room for people to interpret. Like, one thing in there is, like, there's no, in the canon wise, there's no female witchers. Like, it's not in there because blah, blah, blah. Okay, that's cool. That's his canon. Well, in mine, there are. Because I can. I can write it, I'm not making money off of this shit. It's not, they're not going to cease and desist me. But in my story, I can do it. Because in there, it's never just like it is impossible. It's just saying basically they're too weak. And it's like, okay, well, there could be different ways, blah, 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 blah. So I'm actually kind of hoping that's something CDPR does with the next Witcher, is they kind of add a little bit more stuff like that to make it, to me, it'd be a little bit more interesting instead of just having gruff, angry witchers out there that they usually have, which they're not all that way. I guess that's harsh. That's unfair.
Yeah, because the books don't specifically say there cannot be female witchers.
Yeah.
They just say that they haven't tried.
Yeah.
They say basically, there's like, we're not even going to try because they're weak women. Like, they can't handle it. It's like, okay.
Yeah, when it comes to his mindset in the book, Sapkowski's not exactly 21st century.
No. I do think he has gotten better, though. And like a lot of stuff he said, in regards to like the series and whatnot, he seems to definitely be a lot better. So if he does, I know he's supposed to be writing something, like writing more. If that ever does come out, that'll be fascinating to see what that is like.
Though politically leaning, he's very left, right? Minority rights, especially, ethnic minority, stuff like that. It comes up in the Witcher universe all the time.
Sadly, that's considered politically left.
It should be the standard.
I know, but I'm saying the fact that that's even a thing to be like, hey, non-white people are people too. And like, too, another thing too, just hitting on that, like when it comes to it, and people are like, oh, I don't like politics in my thing. I'm like, you can definitely tell Milva gets pregnant during the books and is basically contemplating like an abortion. And she's like asking Biggs, and Geralt's just like, man, that's up to you. Like, that's your decision. And I'm like, okay, it could be reading too much into that. But is that basically Sapkowski being like, women, do your own thing and do it? I'm just like, oh shit, how about that? Based Geralt,
Yeah, overall, the position of females in the Witcher universe is actually quite decent, right? They can be successful monarchs, sorceresses. They are much more successful than, let's say, women in medieval Europe. They can do more. They can study. They can develop. They can be scientists.
That drives me the craziest the most, again, having a history degree in mainly medieval Europe, is when people read a fantasy medieval thing. And even like The Witcher, especially like The Witcher 3, like Novigrad, that's like early modern. That's like a Renaissance town there. And like the full plate armor that they're wearing, that is not really medieval. That is super late medieval, like 16th century, or like early modern again, late Renaissance kind of thing.
Yeah,
well, like oh, that
like the full Gothic German plate, right? That's like maybe late 1400s, but most likely deep into 1500s, which is already the early modern period.
Yeah, full plate armor as it was like late 100 Years of War. But yeah, the ones when they're wearing all of that, even like jousting was not really a big medieval thing. That was much more popular, like late Renaissance, 1500s, 16th century. Like the biggest tournament game, if you will, was the melee in the Middle Ages. It was not the joust.
Yeah.
Like they did it, but it wasn't like that big. It got banned actually.
Yeah, but didn't they come up with jousting because the church was not exactly happy about melee? I think there was both ecclesiastical and political controversy regarding Melee.
Yeah, because they just kept. You were supposed to take him for ransom. Like you wanted to take him hostage ransom basically, because then you'd get a bunch of money from him. The richer they were, like you had I forgot his name. There's like a guy. There's a knight, English guy who basically made his living off of that, and he was famous for it. Was getting in these melees and capturing, pacifying a rich noble, and then just getting paid like crazy for the ransom, because that's what happened in the melee. And then they jousted because it was cool looking, and then they started dying, and then the kings were just like, nah, we probably shouldn't be doing that anymore.
Though there was a French king who died as a result of jousting.
Yeah, I can't remember.
Wasn't it Henry Valois, the guy who was crowned the king of Poland during their first royal election, and then his brother, who was the king of France, died, and suddenly he became the heir apparent, and he was like, yeah, crown of France is probably worth more than crown of Poland. So he fled the country disguised as a woman. So he fled to France, assumed the throne in France, and then died in a jousting tournament. I think that's what happened.
There you go.
Move. I'm not sure. I'm not 100% sure if it was him. But he was a very interesting character, because like overall the concept of royal elections where the nobility can elect a king who doesn't even have to be from that country is super fun to talk about, even though politically it was ridiculous. And then the same guy apparently being very controversial in his adopted country because his sexual preferences were not exactly in line with what the church was teaching at the time, or even now. And then, fleeing the country disguised as a woman and then dying in a jousting tournament. That's a legend.
Yeah, that's a way to go out. That's a story.
Yeah, that guy did it all. But I guess we can move to another question.
I was just about to say I'm on the back lag here for history wise, because I'm not as knowledgeable as you two. Maybe going back to the Witcher universe a little bit more. We already talked about just allowing female witchers to be a thing in the universe, but do you have any other aspects of the universe to expand upon that would be limited otherwise, just in stuff that CDPR would do or you would do?
No, I mean, this kind of goes into the next one on here, like with The Witcher 4. I mean, the one thing that I was always hoping, and it was the thing I hoped for the Hogwarts game coming up, Hogwarts Unleashed or whatever, Legacy or whatever Legacy, it is. Yeah, that like with The Witcher 4, I was hoping it would be set in the past, but it seems like it might actually be set in the future, even though we know nothing about it for some reason. I was hoping it was set way in the past when there were a ton of Witchers, like a golden age of Witchers, if you will. Like Old Republic for the Star Wars, and there were a ton of Jedi and Sith. And there would be an overarching main story. Like there's a main story that crosses all of them. But you could pick a cat witcher, you could pick a bear witcher, griffin, like a manticore is something they've actually really started to flesh out CDPR. And based on that would be like your play style. Picking a cat witcher, okay, it's going to be high dex. You can use like 2 weapons, like an offhand dagger or something like that. You pick a bear witcher, it's going to be very constitution build. You're going to be a tank, a broadsword, something like that, 2-handed weapon. And by and large, your main story would be similar over that, but your side quest and what leads you there would be based on that school and something happening with that school to tie you in more personally. I realize that is ungodly ambitious and not feasible to actually make, but to me, that would be what I would be most excited to play.
Sounds really good, though. So,
yeah, it'll exist in my head only, yeah. I'm sure.
CDPR, are you taking notes?
In the meantime, I actually did a quick Google search, and it was actually Henry II who died in a jousting tournament, and Henry Valois was Henry III, and he died because he was assassinated. So that's still somehow unique.
You mixed your Henris there. There you go.
since you want it to be set in the past, Brett, are there any certain historical events that we know about right now that you want to see fleshed out in the game, or?
I mean, not really. And like in the past, I mean, like hundreds of years. Something again that Sapkowski would not have given a fuck about. I don't know. Maybe at the time, go back far enough, you'd be like, "Oh, Falca burned down Rind," or something like that, and talk about that. I don't know if it goes back like that far. You can maybe put stuff like that in. Like you happen to be in Rind with Falca's rebellion, and you have to deal with that. Like that would actually be kind of cool. Now that you mentioned that, okay, there you go. We're adding that in. It's gonna be the main story is gonna be have to do with Falca's rebellion because I love Falca.
Check.
And that's what The Witcher 4 is going to be about.
Yeah.
That is it. If it is, then we'll come back to this, and we'll blow some people's minds.
To be honest, did you expect The Witcher 4 to be announced, and did it impact the content you are making for your podcast?
No, I mean we did a special episode on it. We had a specimen join us to talk about it. At this point, when it comes to games being announced, like it's so fucking meaningless. Like the Elder Scrolls 6 was announced like 5 years ago, 4 years ago, and they're literally, or maybe 3, 4, whatever. Time doesn't even matter anymore. And like nothing else has come out about that game. Like literally nothing. It was officially announced. And so this right here, I mean, I guess you could draw parallels to the past of maybe going, okay, Cyberpunk was announced this year and it came out this year. Witcher 3 was announced this year and it came out this year. You can maybe do something like that to predict when it's going to come out. But other than that, like we just talked about it because it'd be fun to talk about and put an episode out. Otherwise, like we know nothing about it until they actually say something. Me and Lucy talked about this like crazy. It is incredibly disappointing that there's not going to be a Witcher Con this year. I think that is a massive failure on Netflix and CDPR's hands, whatever you want to call it. I don't understand. They did it virtually last year. There's no reason why they could not be able to do it again if there's a COVID scare or something like this. I think it is terrible, especially for like the Netflix series. We've got nothing about that. Like people want so much of this Witcher shit, and like for them to not have a WitcherCon to me is, I'd love to know the reason why it wasn't done. And if they can say the war, Ukraine or whatever, I just don't see why they couldn't be done.
Yeah, because they didn't even talk about Blood Origin at all ever since that first.
No, and that got a
trailer.
release date. That now has the release date for December, and show something from it. Hype it up. Show stills from, because it's being produced right now. Like I get that. I understand why they can't do WitcherCon with the series. Like with everybody in there, they're literally producing it right now. They're making it right now through September, I think. But have something, we mentioned it, or CDPR do something. I don't know. It just seems like I thought we were going to get an annual event last year of WitcherCon, and I guess we're not.
Yeah, M Jackson chat. They mentioned costs. Potentially. It wasn't as profitable in the long run as they thought it would be. But at the same time, they could be doing the WitcherCon, and they could announce and maybe even show something of The Witcher 4 during that event.
Yeah, but something like that you don't do for like, that's not a for-profit thing. That's to get it talked about. That's to get in the news. That's your social media clout. That's to do all that. What Q score, I guess, is what they call it, like your online presence or something like that. Like, I mean, if it is cost, and either CDPR is struggling, then that doesn't really bode well for what is the second largest gaming company in Europe, right?
Yeah.
You mentioned social media presence. As Gwent players, we know that social media is not one of CDPR's strengths.
No, it's pretty terrible. But you're right. Like it goes back to the Gwent, like we talked about, just promoting the game, or I don't know. I'm sure the cost probably there with the war. It's a very easy thing not to do. Maybe they don't feel like right next door doing it would be privy with that going on. I guess. I mean, yeah, it's fine. If they would have said that, that'd be okay. But to go radio silent, especially like Netflix, with Blood Origin 6 months away, you're currently producing The Witcher season 3. They're hemorrhaging money. They're firing people. They're cutting all these shows. Like right now, I'm just thinking like I don't think they would cancel The Witcher per se. Like I just can't imagine that would happen. The only way that show gets canceled is if Henry Cavill leaves, and I just don't think they've kind of almost a sunk cost, if you will, with it. But it just almost just begs you thinking, is everything okay? Are we okay here?
Yeah, I can't think of any other franchise that got both an animated movie spin-off and a separate series spin-off
And there
after
was
only a
supposed to
second
be that
season.
children's animated one that
Yeah,
has
right.
gone completely silent. So I don't know. It's just disappointing because I really thought WitcherCon was going to be something every year, especially in the summer.
Apparently not. That's a sad thing.
Evidently not.
Yeah. Maybe going back to The Witcher 4 just for a little bit more, would you prefer it to be another open world like The Witcher 3 or more like the curated chapters that we got in the first two games?
I mean, at this point right now, it's all about open world, right? I mean, it just seems that way. If one of my favorite games of all time is Uncharted 4. And what I loved about Uncharted 4 was it was straight line linear story. They had a great story to tell. They had great characters. They had great everything. And you weren't lost in 17 billion question marks. You weren't thinking, oh, I got to uncover every little nook and cranny to get this Easter egg. It was, this is the story, and we're going to tell that in like 12 to 14 hours. And then you'd be done with it. I know a lot of people don't like it because they're like, I don't want to pay full price for 12 to 14 hours. When it's something that good, I do. I don't want a game. Because again, when I was in my 20s and in college and all that, fuck, give me a game 700 hours. I'll play the shit out of that. But now I can't do that. Like I can't get down and go another 180 to 100-hour game. And every one I look up, I'm going to start. Like Cyberpunk is one. I do actually want to replay Cyberpunk. But I look there and I'm like, I don't think I have the time commitment to really do it like I used to. So, I mean, I know it's going to be this massive, it's either going to be the biggest game of all time or it's going to be the most dense game. I hope it's dense. Like, put it in an area where you have a city like Novigrad and a surrounding area, but damn, every little street is something. Everything matters in there. Populate the hell out of it. Out in the countryside, you just don't have like a GTA 5 thing where there's just half the map is basically barren. Like if you're going to have something in there, have it populated, have something going on there. And I hope it's that. I hope it's more dense than it is actually big.
Yeah, it actually reminds me of a gaming franchise called Gothic. These games were released in early 2000s in Germany, and they are quite popular in Central and Eastern Europe. And the first two games had a relatively small map, but it all took place in a valley, so every corner of the map was packed with content. The map was not too big, but to explore it, go through the valleys and tunnels and whatnot, it took time and commitment and everything. Every place had something to offer. And then they did Gothic 3, which was huge open world, and it sucked because most of the map didn't have anything. And most of the quests that you encountered in various parts of the map almost felt like they are auto-generated.
Yeah, and that's what, Jags commented in there about like Red Dead 2. Red Dead 2 is massive, and while there is a lot of open area in there that you can't really do anything on, if you're riding your horse, every so often there's something you'll stumble across, whether it be an ambient quest or ambient event, I mean, or just a house where something's going on. You're like, what's going on with that house? Or something like that, to where it's not just, I'm going to ride for 4 to 5 minutes with nothing in that way. And Red Dead 1, if I remember that kind of correct, Red Dead 1 was kind of that way, where it was very barren. I don't think it was supposed to be that way. It's like a Western, the barren West is what it is. But at times I remember in Mexico of just there not being a lot to do there. So Novigrad in The Witcher 3 is my favorite place in all of gaming. It just feels like a lived-in city. Seems like something's always going on. People are going about their day and their lives with no care about us. It's like they don't exist solely for us. And that's something I want from a game more than look at all these special things you can do with the sword. You can swing it this way and these power-ups. Like, I care about story. I care about like feel in a game.
And Dijkstra's in Novigrad, so that's a plus as well.
Depending, I guess, your ending of The Witcher 3 or how you ended Reason of State, whether he is still there or not. He's always there in my playthrough, though.
I love that king art of him in Gwent, the King Dijkstra card.
The benevolent dictator of Novigrad, Sigismund Dijkstra.
Actually, you mentioned GTA 5 as a game that did have that barren feeling. And they did GTA 4 before that, and it was the opposite. It was packed with content.
Yeah.
Like GTA 4 was a much smaller map. It was just Liberty City, which is based on New York City. It had everything. Like every street had something.
All right, maybe one more very small question about The Witcher 4. We know about the School of the Lynx. Would you like to see any other animals represented that we don't know about?
Yeah, the fox, because that's my fox medallion right there that I ordered. Yeah, School of the Fox would obviously be good. So the funny thing about like School of the Lynx is obviously there's no School of the Lynx in any of it. Well, until maybe now. But in The Witcher 3, when you use console commands and you like add equipment, to add School of the Cat equipment, it's Lynx School. So whatever that means, don't know what it means, but you don't add item Cat School, it's Lynx, and it gives you the cat stuff. Whatever.
Yeah. Maybe it's just rebranding. Maybe School of the Cat doesn't sound that ambitious, so they decided, let's call it the School of the Lynx. Kind of like
and there's
the Hexer became The Witcher, right? The original translation of the word of The Witcher in English was the Hexer.
Oh, is it?
And it didn't have the feeling. It didn't sell very well, so they renamed it to The Witcher.
Yeah, that would make sense when it's wait, there's no witches. Does he kill witches? It's like, no. Why is it called The Witcher? I'm like, I don't know, man. I don't know.
It's actually funny because in Polish, the witch is actually means she who knows. So The Witcher is he who knows.
Really?
Yeah. The knowing one.
The knowing one. Sounds like someone who should be out in a decrepit cabin in the woods.
Is that why that card is called She Who Knows?
I don't think so.
That I just made that connection.
Yeah, that's what I thought too. I remember seeing the art of She Who Knows for the first time. It was months before the actual release, and I was like, wow, this is gross.
Yeah, a lot of those are.
We have two more questions on our list, and they are not Witcher related, and they are questions that we have to ask. The first one being, how does someone from Texas develop an interest in medieval history? And to follow up, what time period and geographical area do you usually focus on when reading about the Middle Ages?
So basically, the movie Braveheart came out when I was like 11. So I saw that when I was like 12 years or so. And I was big into history, big in like Texas history, obviously. Texas. We have 7th grade Texas. You have to take Texas history. And so that would have been, 1996, something like that. So I watched Braveheart and I'm like, oh man, this movie's great. Like, fuck all these English people. Let's see them die, like Mel Gibson's want to do. And I just read into it and I was like, oh, Edward Longshanks. Longshanks, that's an awesome name. And then I just looked into it. And looking into Edward Longshanks, William Wallace, and all of that, I realized that movie is almost completely false. Like just about everything is really, really, really wrong. And reading into history, I realized that this was more interesting. The stuff that they didn't put in, the stuff that they cut out and don't put into movies, to me, is often more interesting. And so that just kind of delved into it. I think specifically what I liked about, or what initially got me into like the Middle Ages, was at the time I was like very religious, and and I loved old mythology, which again ties back into religion. I like mythology, not to offend anybody out there. I'm sorry, but I loved old like Greek mythology, all of that, the gods and stuff, Egypt. And so when reading about like the European Middle Ages, this read like a story, it read like a book, it read like a novel. But I'm like, this stuff actually happened. And what I enjoyed more, and it's what I think more people should do, is if you study a history that's not, quote, your own, you can stand outside of it. And it's a problem with so many people, that Americans that study American history, is like, oh, you're in the South. Then it's going to be like, okay, you study the American Civil War. It's like, well, that's like your heritage, that's your lineage. And I imagine it could be problems maybe with some, like Germans that maybe study like Nazi history or World War II, who might even have had a grandparent or something literally fight. I can step back and study 1100s, 1200s, 1300s in a place I've never been. I can look at that in France and all that. I have no French lineage that I know of. And that just kind of got me into it. But specifically, more like, this is what I do on stream. I have a thing where people can do channel points and I read a random history tidbit. Oh, that's reversed. Okay. Western warfare in the age of the Crusades, like 1000. The biggest thing is the Crusades. Like, that's my main thing. I've got, I don't know, 40, 50, 60 books on them. I never sold the books that I bought in college, because if you take a history class over here, generally you're going to have to buy like 10 to 12 books per class. They're decently cheap, like they may be like $10 or something. But selling them back, they'd be like, oh, yeah, I'll give you $3. I'm like, oh, I'm just going to keep it. I'll give you $5. I'm just going to keep all these. So I've just kept all these books that I have. And the Crusades to me is just fascinating, that Europeans just killing each other, and they're like, hey, we need to stop killing each other. Let's go over there and kill them, and it'll be for God, and you'll go to heaven. It'll be great. And then everything that comes out of that is just fascinating to me. Everything that happened during that time period, and they wore like really cool clothes, and I love the heraldry of it. I love banners and the colors, and it's my number one thing that I hate about Hollywood medieval things. What I hated about Game of Thrones somewhat was the lack of color. There is so much color if you look at the paintings and the heraldry of it, like so much peacocking, if you will. And I just hate that it's just all grimy shit in the mud. Like, everyone's dirty and like bad teeth and all that. And I'm like, no, they probably had great teeth because they didn't eat sugar. Poor people didn't eat anything refined. They ate the healthiest of breads, because the more refined bread costs more, and that's what the nobles ate. And so just stuff like that was just interesting, just to learn about and feel like you have special knowledge.
Yeah, and you raised a number of very valid points. For example, the shit and mud comment. If you read anything about the medieval history, there was so many customs that related to hygiene and how proud people were of their clothes, because clothes were expensive. You only had so many clothes for so many years, so people took great care of them. And then, for example, it was customary, if you arrived somewhere, for the host to offer you a bath. And Hollywood just doesn't depict that.
And a big thing about that too is there's almost no actual firsthand knowledge. There's very, very, very little of peasant life, because no one fucking cared about them. Peasants couldn't read and write, and they weren't taking a fucking diary, even if they could. And then the nobles are like, these are people. These are barely people. They're one step above a cow. And honestly, most times I'd rather have a cow, because I can eat a cow. Like, these are chattel to them. They work the fields. They could not have given two shits about these peasants unless they could work the fields. So much of that stuff we just don't know about. What we do know is the noble stuff. Like, you're right, the nobility. And like but it drives me also mental when like eating, they had it in The Witcher, the season 2 actually brought it up, when they're like eating with their hands and they're like eating with both hands. And I'm like, okay, these are Witchers. They're uncouth. Maybe they could do that. But again, this is a time, if you're talking about medieval time period, a lot of times you had to wipe your hands. You had to wipe your hands. You had an unclean hand and you had a clean hand. And everything was served family style. It wasn't like your own plate that a waiter brought it to. Everything's on the table. and you grab that shit. And sometimes you would grab that shit with your hands. You'd eat it with your hands. It wouldn't be a plate. It'd usually be like a thing of bread, that they would soak up, and then they'd give that to the poor people because, they can't eat the regular food. They got to eat our literal soaked plates and stuff like that. And again, it's not a big deal. It's nothing that you would lose to take it out of. But it's stuff like that that I'd like to see put more in. I know, like, I've been rewatching Band of Brothers because this summer I always do that around D-Day. And they went to such painstaking practices, if you will, to make that legit in what happened. And I'm just hoping that somebody would do that for Medieval. But then again, there's only that last Duel came out, and that's the first medieval motion picture to come out since that god-awful Robin Hood movie. So it's just not that big a deal, I guess.
And speaking of medieval history, and that's going to be the last question. It's actually a question that was asked by Mercer in our Discord. How familiar are you with Don Quixote and its author and your namesake, Miguel de Cervantes?
Oh, I've never heard of that.
Oh, really?
I'm kidding. Of course I'm kidding. No, yes. No,
I assume that at some point you did Google your name. It's like, okay, this guy.
Yes, at any point, yeah. No. I've known about that like forever, of course. Like the name seems to be more popular now, at least around, but like when I was a kid, I never saw that last name. I think there might have been like one other person in my high school of like 4,000 people that might have had it, and I didn't know who they were. And no, I mean, he's, Miguel de Cervantes is basically called the Shakespeare of Spain. He's like the Shakespeare of the Spanish language. It's a wild book. My first Twitch name that I did was La Chaotic. I'm sorry, Quixot, like IC or something like that. But it was so hard to pronounce, and people kept saying Quixotic. And they're like, Quixotic. I'm like, no, it's a Don Quixote reference. I'm like, I got to get rid of that. But that was that's what I had on there. And I'll use like fantasy football, fantasy based stuff like that. I'll use the name Tilting at Windmills, which again is a reference to Don Quixote. And no, it's just something in there to say like, yeah, I'm related to him. He's, back. They're like, really? I'm like, no, I don't know. But sure, why not? Cervantes is 12th century Castilian by everything I've looked up. So I'll just be like, yeah, I'll just say that I am. But yeah, it's a wild book, and it stayed around, I guess, so it must be a masterpiece.
And out of pure curiosity, do you actually have roots in Spain? Do you speak Spanish?
I mean, the name obviously goes back to it. My dad is Mexican, but he was born in Texas. His parents were born in Texas, and their parents were born in Texas.
Oh, so you guys are Tejanos.
Yeah, exactly. But when it comes back to there, it's one of those were they in Texas the whole time, and did the border cross them as opposed to way 200 years ago as opposed to them crossing the border kind of thing. So it's one of those. I probably on my dad's side have family that have been in Texas longer than all a bunch of white people running around, being native Texan kind of things. But somewhere down the line, somebody would have come from Spain with that name, like just unless or just was, I don't know. It obviously goes back somewhere to Spain, judging by what it is, because we are not indigenous. Like it's definitely not indigenous, like Mexican.
With that being said, we exhausted our question list. I actually hoped we could make it in 2 hours, but it took slightly longer, 2.5 hours. So that means we have to go to our last segment, which is shameless plug. So, Brett, if our viewers would like to discover more of your content or more of yourself, where can they find you?
Yeah, thanks again for having me. I'm sorry I went so long early on. I'm telling you though, I get started on this, but no, this was great to talk about. Really appreciate it. On Twitter, it's TheFoxBride 4. Twitch is TheFoxBride. As far as the podcast goes, you'll find it at those, on the Twitter, on Twitter as well. But Witcher Podcast is there. Search On the Path on any podcasting platform. Again, the Gwentfinity channel on 983 starting tomorrow. It will be in video form, so if you don't listen to podcasts on a podcatcher or platform, you will be able to do it and see me and Lucy. I used to call people freaks that want to watch people podcasts. It was like people in here that want to watch it. If you want to do that, it'll be there tomorrow. We're getting released at, I believe, 1 p.m. Central Time, my time. So like be 7. I don't know. I lose track. I lose track of what it is. Check for that tomorrow. You can see it on there. That's basically about it. And again, thank y'all for having me.
It was great to have you. Amazing guest once again.
Indeed.
Trophy, your turn.
I just wanted to also say it was definitely not a problem to go over the 2 hours. It was a joy to talk about all the topics that we just had. From my end, it's Trovinut, so that's TROVNUT, on both YouTube and Twitch, so that's pretty simple. On Twitter as well, so it's all the same thing. You can see me, watch me there, play Gwent, play Elden Ring. There's a lot of stuff I do, just the stuff that I like to play. There's no real rhyme or reason to it. And then on YouTube, it's mostly Gwent deck guides.
All right. And you can guys find me here on Twitch, twitch.tv/Weisenberg, or on Twitter @WeisenbergMON, or on YouTube. Just look for Weisenberg Gwent, and I'm just going to remind you that this episode is going to be uploaded on our Merchants of Novigrad channel on YouTube, either later today or tomorrow, and after that on all kinds of podcasting platforms if you would rather listen than watch. With that being said, thank you guys for watching. Thank you guys for asking questions and chatting with us and making comments. It was a pleasure. We'll see you next weekend. So only 7 days away from the next episode. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday. We'll see you guys later.
Y'all.